1949 has gone on to carve a niche for itself as a much sought-after management institution. The International Labour Organization, on the other hand, is a uniquely tripartite structure United Nations organizations which deals with issues related to labour laws, standards and regulations. Today's seminar is based on the theme of labour law and governance reforms and labour rights in India in the era of globalization. And it couldn't have been timed more aptly, given the era in which we are living in, marked by the rapid transformation of labour reforms and the changing demographics of the workforce as well as the workers. We sincerely hope that this seminar will go on to be what it has set out to be. Without further ado, we'll begin today's inaugural ceremony. I would like to request on the dais Father April, Director XLRI. Please, Father. We would like to offer a small token of appreciation to Father. I would now request Professor Pranavesh Ray, Dean Academics XLRI, to kindly come up on the dais. Please, sir. I would now request Professor Shantanu Sarkar, Associate Dean Program XLRI, to kindly take a seat on the dais. Please, sir. I would now request Mr. Raghavan, the Asia Pacific Desk Officer, ILO Active, Bureau for Workers' Activities, Geneva, to kindly come up on the dais. Please, sir. I would like to call upon the dais Professor Dave Martin, Professor, Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, and Visiting Professor, University of Duke, USA, to kindly come up on the dais. Please, sir. I would once again like to extend a very warm welcome to all our guests and to our delegates on the dais. We will now begin the inaugural ceremony with a small lighting of the lamp ceremony. Thank you, guests. We begin this session with a small welcome note about the seminar and about XLRI. And for that, I would like to request Professor Pranavesh Ray to kindly come up and address the gathering.
Abraham, Director XLRI, Mr. Raghavan, Desk Officer ILO and the other dignitaries present on the dais. Faculty colleagues from XLRI and outside, students, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you for this joint seminar by XLRI and ILO on a topical and an important theme, labor law and governance, reforms and labor rights in India in the post-reform period. Apparently, the combination of the Bureau of Worker Activities ILO, ACTRA, and XLRI, a B school of repute, looks perplexing. But a look at the history of XLRI and its subsequent activities would remove the apparent contradiction. XLRI's founding fathers initiated this institute in 1949 with programs for trade union leaders and supervisors. In fact, our founding director, while starting the initial operations, were extensively helped by a core committee comprising of union leader Mr. Michael John, the general manager of DISCO, and some of the labor department officials, a tripartite approach advocated by ILO. Subsequently, in 1953, we launched the first 2-year full-time program for industrial relations and welfare. Even later, while business management program was started, XLRI did not lose its academic focus and professional concern about industrial relations. Even now, we perhaps would be counted among the few who persist with the teaching of and research in industrial relations in a significant manner. Our core strengths are teaching, research, and training, and we are most favorably placed among the top B schools not only in India but also in Asia. It is therefore quite natural that ILO is setting its feet on the fertile soils of XLRI, and XLRI is poised to enhance its capabilities by having access to ILO. It needs no elaboration that ILO is the undisputed global institution to deal with aspects relating to world of work. In fact, the 8 core ILO conventions covering freedom of association and collective bargaining, forced labor, child labor, and non-discrimination have been elevated to the pedestal of fundamental human rights. However, it is a matter of concern that India has not ratified 4 of them, including those related to freedom of association and collective bargaining, which are core issues for academicians and practitioners in the field of industrial relations. The ratification of these 4 core conventions, in fact, constitute the main element of the agenda of the trade unions, and I gather it is the core concern of ACTRAC as well. The seminar then assumes added significance as it seeks to deliberate on the proposed reforms concerning some labor laws and governance systems. I am confident that the seminar would interest our students also, who are poised to become future HR and IR managers. In this sense, the seminar provides an excellent opportunity to look for avenues to strengthen the interface between XLRI and ILO. I once again welcome the present and former officials from the Bureau of Workers Activities, Bangkok office, Mr. Raghavan and Ms. Christine Nathan. I thank them immensely not only for sustaining the adventure of reaching Jamshedpur, but also for the tremendous efforts in seeing the fruition of this seminar. Industrial relations cannot be visualized without the trade union leaders, and a seminar of this type inevitably has to have trade union leaders. I take pleasure in welcoming all our friends from the central trade unions who have come from various parts of India, including Jamshedpur. Academic deliberations provide the cutting edge in the policy debates. I heartily welcome all the academic delegates, Dr. Praveen Sinha, Senior Advisor, Trade Union and Labour Relations, FDS, New Delhi, Professor Dev Nathan, Professor, the Institute of Human Development, Visiting Professor, University of Duke, USA, Professor Praveen Kumar Jha, Professor, Center for Economic Studies and Planning and Chairperson, Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies, JMU, New Delhi, and Ms. Ramapriya Gopalakrishnan, advocate from Chennai and an ILO consultant. Incidentally, today is an auspicious day, the starting of the greatest festival, at least in this part of the country, Durga Puja. A festival where the triumph of the good over the evil is commemorated and human values are upheld. May the laborers' fight against injustice always end in their triumph. They have nothing to lose except their chains. At the end, I wish the seminar a grand success and look forward to many more such events in association with the ILO in future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those thought-provoking words. I would now like to request Father Abraham to kindly address the gathering. Please, Father.
An auspicious occasion. Dear friends, I am extremely glad to participate in this first of its kind jointly conducted seminar on labor law and government reforms and labor rights in India in the era of globalization. As Professor Ray has noted in his welcome address, XLRI has been closely associated with the industrial relations domain since its founding and over the last 6 decades has trained thousands of professionals in the HRM area, which was formerly known as PM&IL. In fact, Professor Narbaj Ray and I are students of XLRI. The ILO is a uniquely structured tripartite organization of the UN family, and its operations are premised on the values of moral participation and social justice. We here at XLRI consider our association with ILO in this seminar as a matter of honor and a golden opportunity to explore avenues to interface between XLRI and ILO. Our vision of renewing the face of the earth is closely aligned to ILO's mission of advancement of social justice. In fact, we are viewed as a business school with a difference, as we are imbued with a mission to infuse ethics into business governance. We attach significant importance to the advancement of human values. These, I trust, constitute the driving agenda of ILO for decades and even almost a century. I take this opportunity to convey a congratulatory message to ILO in its centennial celebratory preparations. The 20th century has been rightly called as the century of laboring, perhaps I should rephrase it as the laboring humans, since a large portion of today's global labor force includes women also. As the century witnessed sea changes in the realm of industrial relations and labor market governance, trade unions came to be accepted, collective bargaining was institutionalized, and workers' rights were enshrined in many countries' constitutions. The independence struggle in India, as in other nations, integrated the labor movement in a manner to serve both the political and industrial interests. As the 20th century progressed, the labor power began to reflect in the political arena as mainstream political parties sought to integrate the trade unions in the new political order. Industrial democracy became an integral part of liberal democracy. The destructive consequences of the World War II or World War I clearly sent a message that in the absence of social justice, there could be no sustainable global peace. It was this premise that universal, lasting peace can only be established if it is based on social justice that led to the foundation of ILO in 1990, with India being one of its founder members. The Declaration of Philadelphia rightly underscores the significant premise that labor is not a commodity. This in fact provides justly so a necessary corrective and a valid perspective on the role of labor and economic and social progress. ILO's mission and objectives emphasize clearly that industrial democracy, as embodied in freedom of association and reflected in the institutions of consultation and dialogue, can usher in sustainable development. It is not a mere coincidence that post-Second World War, the economies of advanced nations witnessed perhaps the highest growth rates when the trade unions were fully integrated into the social and economic political order. Social, economic and political order. From 1970s onwards, as the global economy witnessed runaway inflation and economic crisis, the prevailing world economic order was severely tested. While globalization is not something new, since the mid-1980s, a different form of globalization characterized by significant changes in technology, communication and transport ushered in changes that sought to redefine economic and social orders. The fall of several wars, physical and virtual, and the termination of Cold War era ushered in an era of pragmatism across political, economic, and social spheres. On many levels, the 20th century entered on a note of significant turmoil fueled by crisis. When globalization was challenging the established notions of social and political justice, and the market economy was gaining, shall I say, undue ascendancy, the ILO came up with a masterstroke, that is, the philosophy of decent work. It was expounded in 1999 by the then Director General Mr. Juan Somavia. It succinctly and comprehensively addresses, I must say, even the foundation of a decent society. While globalization may be considered as inevitable, surely it can be managed in such a manner to ensure equitable outcomes in the labor market and the industrial relations system. In this context, trade unions, being important social institutions, have a major role to play in ensuring social justice. Labor rights should not be abandoned in the pursuit of faster economic progress, as this route is unsustainable and myopic in the long term. The recent wage rise across sectors in China is ample evidence that if labor force is not adequately rewarded and respected, there will be mass shutdowns and go-slow scenarios resulting in economic slowdown. It is fairly well known that many labor laws are archaic and are badly in need for reform. It is significant to note that both trade unions and employers' organizations converge on this. However, basic and even apparently irreconcilable differences exist in the substance and even the mode of introducing changes. While employers desire unfettered labor flexibility to be able to compete in the increasingly dynamic global market environment, the trade unions complain of declining labor standards. As is often the case, there is some merit in the contentions of both the camps. Friends, some state governments like Rajasthan and the central government have in the recent months floated several reform initiatives with regard to labor law and governance systems in their stated quest employment creation, and expanding the share of manufacturing in the national income to a respectable level. Admittedly, both the content and the mode of introducing these measures have been criticized not only by trade unions but by academics. The idea of flexicurity, which originated in Europe, has rich merit as it seeks to provide the necessary flexibility in the firm's operations and at the same time extends to workers adequate security through active labor market policies and creation of a sound social security system. I understand that ILO is exploring the aspects related to flexicurity for decent work as a labor market policy. I also see merit in the ILO approach of social dialogue as a principal and even primary socially interactive institution to policy making. Social dialogue, in fact, befits a democratic system. The world is watching us, not merely the political front, but also with regard to economic and other policy making aspects. It is in these contexts that today's seminar assumes interest, even significance, as I see the credentials of the panelists of the technical session. I am confident that the proceedings would bear the mark of scholarship and a passionate discussion on the critical issues concerning labor law and governance reform. I take this opportunity to extend my best wishes for a productive and interesting series of panel discussions. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
Thank you, Father. Your words have always been a beacon of light for us. I would like to kindly request all our guests and delegates to kindly switch off their cell phones or put them on the silent mode to ensure the smooth flow of the seminar. I would now request Mr. Raghavan, the Asia Pacific Desk Officer of ILO Active Bureau for Workers' Activities, Geneva, to kindly introduce the seminar and talk a few words about ILO. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm proud that XLRI, other members of the Institute, invited guests, respected resource persons, my colleagues from the trade union movement, and the students. I also join others to extend my pleasure on behalf of the ILO to work together with the XLRI University and to bring together the trade unions and also to work together with the students. It is a great pleasure, personally for me, to be here today and be part of this discussion. I also like to say that I bring greetings to all of you from Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Wright. I would like to reflect on the ILO a little bit and also talk about why we are here, the objectives of the seminar. Let me begin by talking a little bit about the ILO itself. And bear with me if I'm talking some of the fundamentals about the ILO, because I understand the audience has got mixed experience. You're very experienced trade unionists who know about the ILO, and also I'd like to reflect to the students who would like to know a little bit more about the organization. I would like to begin by talking about a historic event, which I think Father Abraham has also mentioned, the Declaration of Philadelphia in 1944 in Washington at the ILO Conference at the time. And it is an important declaration because it then later becomes, and it has become, a part of the constitution of the ILO. And it says, and I would like to quote the conference affirmed that labor is not a commodity. Also, he talks about
that poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. Reflecting on the fact that labor is not a commodity, this shows what the ILO stands for. What is the value of the ILO? What are the principles behind what ILO does and its work? Labor is not a commodity means labor is not a machine. Cannot be treated like a machine or an instrument. Labor workers are human beings. They need respect. They get old. They get sick. They're part of the family. They would like to have aspirations to grow, to be higher up within the organization. It's important that that is respected. Poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. Simply means that one nation cannot leave behind saying that I'm doing well, I do not care, or I do not have anything to do with other countries or other regions which are poor. The poor countries, the poor regions will bring down the rich nations. So it's important that there is fair distribution of wealth. And these are some of the values of the ILO, on which the ILO stands. And we are more and more becoming a global village. What happens in one country is reflected negatively or positively in other countries. The ILO, as has been mentioned, was founded in 1990, soon after the First World War. And if one reflects the time, the world was in chaos. The industrialized nations who are now called industrialized were going through poverty, were going through industrializing themselves. There was a lot of non-respect for workers and a lot of exploitation of workers. India has been or is a founding member of the ILO, and as mentioned earlier, being a founding member, still it has not ratified some of the basic ILO conventions, and I think that would be one of the issues, or they would be reflected in our discussion. The ILO was founded against the background of, as I said, exploitation of workers in the industrializing nations of the time. It was founded to improve the conditions of workers and advance the cause of social justice. And if you look at the preamble of the ILO Constitution, it says, universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based on social justice. It comes to the background that 1990 and after the First World War. And also it says, and whereas conditions of labor exist involving such injustice, hardship, and privacy to large numbers of people as to produce unrest so great that the peace and harmony of the world are imperative, and an improvement of these conditions is urgently required. Whereas also the failure of any nation to adopt human conditions of labor is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries. Also, I would like to express that there should not be any misunderstanding that ILO is a trade union organization. ILO is not a trade union organization. ILO is an organization which we say tripartite, which means the workers, the employers, and the government have equal rights in the policy development and also in the administration of the organization. When we say the policy decision, the tripartite parties, for the social partners, the workers and the employers, and the government sit together at the annual conference of the ILO and decide the policies of the ILO. It is a very unique organization within the UN family, because it's the only organization where workers sit on the same platform and have the same rights as the employers and the government. They have the same right in terms of voting powers. They have the same right in terms of expressing their views and deciding upon the policies and the programs of the ILO. And by the way, also, those who go to attend the International Labour Conference every year, it is compulsory that the government pays for their employers and workers to participate in the conference. If they do not bring along workers and employers organization representatives, then they will be declared as not complete delegations and can be part from participating in the decision making of the ILO. Tripartism and social dialogue are the underlying values of the organization in terms of work. It is about the importance of cooperation between government, employers and workers organizations in fostering social and economic progress. The ILO aims to ensure that it serves the needs of the working women and men by bringing together governments, employers and workers to set labor standards, develop policies and devise programs. The very structure of the ILO, where workers and employers together have an equal voice with government in its deliberations, shows social dialogue in action. It ensures that the views of the social partners are closely reflected in ILO and ILO labor standard policies and programs. The ILO encourages tripartism within its constituents and member states by promoting a social dialogue between trade unions and employers and formulating and where appropriate implementing national policies on social, economic and many other issues. By the way, Indian government has ratified what we say Convention number 144, which means that they agree that their laws and practices will be in line where workers and employers are involved in policy making decisions of the country. Harmonious industrial relations at the workplace can only be achieved if there is respect for workers and employers, if there is mechanism for both the parties to discuss, negotiate, and agree on terms and conditions of workplace relations. It can be done only through a process of collective bargaining. Absence of that is anarchy in our view. The role of the government, the Ministry of Labour, is important in this regard, and their role is to provide an environment, to create an environment that provides for interaction between the workers, the unions, and the employers. That is an important role for the government. And in this regard, it is the role of the government to provide appropriate laws and practices to have that happen. And I would like to say that if there is any message for our aspiring managers, students here, that this is the message I would like to pass on about industrial relations, the role of the workers and employers at the enterprise level, the harmony which can be created of them working together, and why it is important that collective bargaining should be the process to achieve whatever working conditions, wages, the two parties agree. The ILO is one organization which has got a large number of member countries. I think more or less most of the countries are, and presently 185 countries are members of the organization. Let me also say that workers and employers legally and constitutionally play a role within the industrial relations environment, play a role within the ILO. And in this regard, other organizations like the NGOs do not have a role because they cannot do collective bargaining. It is only the workers who can, on behalf of their organized labor, be able to sit across and negotiate with the employers. Let me say a few words on the International Labour Standards because that's a basic work of the ILO. It adopts what we say International Labour Standards. These are minimum standards, but these are standards which can be applied to all countries, regardless of their economic conditions, regardless of their size, and also political background. So it applies to all. Sometimes international labor standards are blamed for saying that this is about what we call giving special regard to or special conditions to developed countries, and it is against the development of developing countries. It is not so. And why? Because these international labor standards are negotiated by all three parties at the International Labour Conference. And most of the international labor standards take more than 2 years of deliberations before it is adopted. And it is adopted by 2/3 the majority of the conference, which means that many governments, many employers and workers agree to that. And only then it becomes a international norm, and which then is upon the government to ratify. And once they ratify, then the laws and practices need to be brought in line with the international labour standards. The relevance of the ILO. When ILO was established in 1990s, and if you look back, what were some of the issues at that time ILO looked at? What were some of the issues at that time the workers, employers, and the government thought was important? And if you look at the first convention which was adopted by the ILO was on hours of work. Talked about the workers, not only for workers, but to have good productivity, good industrial relations. It needs to have a regulation on how many hours workers can work. And it said about 8 hours of work per day, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of sleep. That's the maximum it talks about, and that's the standard which is now being adopted by many countries. So, 5 days, 40 hours, 6 days, 48 hours. The other convention which at that time was important, and if you reflect, these are also important now. It talks about unemployment, it talks about or adopted conventions on maternity protection, and we still are struggling providing that protection to women in many countries. Proper maternity protection. Night work protection, night work for women, minimum age, and night work for young persons. Still we are struggling with that. We see a lot of child labor. And talking about the relevance of the ILO, if you look at these conventions which were adopted in 1990, they are still relevant today. And we are still looking at how to improve these conditions which I talked about. As late as 2012, a new convention was adopted, which was to provide protection to domestic workers. So far, ILO has adopted about 189 conventions and about 203 recommendations. And as being mentioned earlier, it has 8 core conventions. We talk about the core values. I've talked about the ILO Conference, which is very important in terms of the policy being developed. And let me repeat to say that ILO is about social justice, it's about fair distribution of wealth, economic development, it's about poverty reduction, it's about increased productivity, it's about improving and providing for healthy industrial relations, environment, It is about giving right to organized labor as well as organized employers' organization. And it is about workers and employers getting together through a process of collective bargaining to set wages and working conditions for their enterprise. As mentioned, in 1990, ILO was founded. Very soon, after 5 years, we would be completing 100 years of the existence of the ILO. And as I mentioned earlier, the ILO was relevant then. And if you look at the situation today, the ILO is relevant, probably more relevant today. And as Father Abraham has mentioned about the situation in India, around which we are going to talk about the labor law reform, the flexibility of labor laws, the increasing number of people in the what we say precarious employment do not have proper conditions to work, where labor law cannot be applied. These are issues which are relevant now, and these are the issues which we would like to talk about. And reflecting on what I talked about, the values of the ILO, reflecting on that, we would like to look at this one-day seminar with the aim to see how we can create an environment where conversation can take place between or among the people who are interested in these issues. The students, future managers, the workers, the trade unions, workers who are involved, the academic world, and the ILO. And that's what the objective of the seminar is today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure all of us present here today would have gained much insight about ILO and the various dimensions of ILO from this address. I would once again kindly request the members of the audience to put their cell phone on the silent mode. I would now request Professor Dave Nathan, Professor, Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, and Visiting Professor, University of USA, to kindly present the background paper. Please, sir.
Quite happy. And it's a Xavier Institute. I studied in St. Xavier School in Bombay. So quite happy to come to another Xavier Institute in another part of the country. I've been asked to present a background. Okay, this is better. I can use both my hands to do other things. Thank you. I've been asked to present a background, so I won't go so much into the nitty-gritty of the labor reforms, except in the end I'll come to it. But I'd really like to present a framework within which we can look at the issues that we have to deal with. The framework deals with the following questions. Why do we deal with labor reform? Why do we deal with labor law? Secondly, what is it all about? What really constitutes this area of discussion? Third, where do we want to go? Because if we talk of reform, we must know why we want a kind of reform. What is our strategic objective toward which we want firms and the economy to grow, to go? And finally, the key issues. Now, the question of why do we have labor laws has been already referred to a little bit, so I'll just go through that very quickly. That we have, for instance, laws on things like minimum wages. The reason is that over a long period of history, we have come to accept in most parts of the world that labor is not a commodity like every other commodity, and that therefore the price of labor power, the price at which labor is sold and bought, which is wages, is not something that should be left entirely to the market to determine. Also that other things like labor employment conditions or hours of work, again, are not things to be left entirely to the market to determine. So this is of course, this came about through a long period of struggle. Many workers fought for these rights. The International Seamstress Union in New York, for instance, fought for the 8-hour working day. There are many other of these incidents all across the world. So, but of course, market. So why is it important? One is that labor is not just, as I said, a commodity. Not only is it a matter of the rights of workers themselves, but it is also a matter of the role of labor in the economy. Because labor workers are also consumers, and this was very well understood by that capitalist Henry Ford, who, when he set up his factory to mass produce cars, paid, at that time something that was quite unheard of, paid his workers a wage at which they could also buy, some of them at least, many of them could buy cars. So the question is that the wages of labor is also a macroeconomic factor in the development of the economy. Without a stable wage earning working class, we would not be able to have a sustainable rate of growth. That's an important factor. Secondly, which I'll come back to later on, it's not just that they are consumers, they are also producers, and the manner in which they are related to the production process is important for the results that we get out of production itself. It's not just that I will do a little more in detail later on, the manner of involvement is important. But of course, market conditions do affect wages, particularly in a developing country like India, where we have a very large, what we may call a reserve army of labor, in surplus labor in agriculture and low productivity services. Sorry, it's a bit of an echo. Can we turn on the volume a little bit? Are you getting an echo? I'm feeling the echo. Okay. So, in a situation of surplus labor, which was analyzed by the economist Arthur Lewis, where labor can be transferred from surplus labor from agriculture can be transferred to industry at almost a constant wage rate, that will of course be a dampener to any efforts to increase the wage, the minimum wage or the wage that prevails. In China now, for instance, you do find that since they have perhaps crossed what we call the Louisian transition and no more have that huge mass of surplus labor which is available to be shifted from rural areas to urban industry, therefore in the last 10 years or so, wage rates in China have gone up very rapidly and have increased about at least 3 times in this 10-year period. India, of course, in India too, there has been an increase in the wage rate, but that's not because of that we don't have surplus labor anymore. There has been an increase in productivity of that labor, which is still, however, somewhat surplus and can well be shifted from agriculture into industry. Anyway, so this is the background for why we deal with the question of labor and labor laws and employment, the issues in that. Now, what do we deal with when we talk about labor laws? Labor laws deal with what we may call employment relations, which is a composite of at least 4 elements. One is there's the employment contract. What type of contract do you have? Is it a permanent contract? Is it a direct contract, an indirect contract, permanent, casual, and so on? Second is there are workplace rules. What do you do? How do you do it? What kind of work do you do? There are rules about that which are part of the system of employment relations. Third, there's the supervision method. How do you supervise the workers? What is the system that is followed in supervision? And fourth, of course, there are the wages and the compensation schemes. Now, if we can take two typical types of employment relations, which are perhaps two ends of the spectrum. One is what we may call which came to be known as the Japanese employment system, which, for instance, had an employment contract, usually direct contract. It used to be at one time a lifetime contract, that is till the worker retired, or at least a fixed term contract for a number of years, 5 years and so on. Secondly, the workplace rules were quite flexible in terms of what work was required of the worker. There was a manner of what's called flexible or multi-skilling, very different from what we have had for a long time in India, where there's a very rigid system of what kind of worker. You're a machinist, you're a fitter, you're an electrician, or you're a helper, so that the fitter will not do the job of the helper, and so on. So in India, of course, not only India, USA also had a very strict manner in which the workplace duties were defined. The third one is the supervision method, which is known in China, which is known in Japan as the quality circles, whereby workers had some amount of autonomy in taking shop floor decisions. The wage system was one of what we call the efficiency wages, where along with a higher than the prevailing market wage rate, there would also be a manner of incentive for improvements. This is what, in a broad sense, is called a high performance work system. Not that it's a uniformly so, it's an ideal typical system. So there is many variations in that. On the other end of it, you may have what we know under the Indian contract labor system, where we have an indirect contract. The worker is not a direct employee of the firm for which he or she is working. It's only indirect because you are contracted by the contractor. The workplace rules give relatively fixed tasks in terms of the duties to be performed. Supervision method is indirectly by the firm and very strongly hierarchical, with a contractor or supervisor, often with very little dignity afforded to the worker, who is the contract laborer. The wage system has wages which are at best just a little above the minimum, often even below the minimum through various kinds of deductions, or even illegally having two account books is a very common practice in many areas. That you have one account book for the inspector and another the real account book, which is where you actually pay the worker something less. So there's a high level of violation of various kinds of laws. This we can characterize as a type of sweated labor, where you try to extract the maximum out of the worker as it is possible within a given period of time. Now, how do you determine, this is a firm finally that decides on what kind of employment relations it will set up. This is not all entirely a legal matter, though it is influenced by the law. But the law doesn't mean you have to follow it, or you have to only follow that. You can go beyond it, you can go above it. You don't have to have contract labor. The contract labor is allowed, but it's a choice of the firm whether or not to have contract labor. It's not mandated by any law. So therefore, it's important to see that the employment relations are an endogenous result of a firm's economic strategy. It's not something that just happens by itself. It is the firms that decide on their strategy, and on that basis have a certain set of employment relations that they utilize or set up. Now, what influences this strategy by the firms? One of course is the type of product market. Is it a market in which there is a very high level of competition with very low profits, what we call in economics a competitive situation with hardly any surplus profit, only the normal profit is being earned. But if you have a product which has a kind of, is a differentiated product, higher quality, or a branded product, then you may be able to get some rent. And some of that rent could then be taken or passed on to the worker, that you may get a higher type of wage prevailing in a monopoly firm which earns some kind of rent. The strategy of the firm is also important. What kind of market is the strategy is the firm trying to enter? It might be in a very commoditized, low profit segment, but it may have the ambition to develop its own intellectual property protected products, and move into a high quality, high rate strategy, in which case it will have a different kind of employment relation strategy other than if it were just continuing with a very low commoditized type of market. Third, of course, is the governance system, both public and private. It's not just the laws, it's also the contracted relations. Nowadays, with outsourcing being the manner in which firms try to reduce costs, there's a lot of contracted relations between the parent firm and the outsourced contractor. This is not only national, it's also global, international. So you have international firms, whether it is in garments or leather or even in automobiles, which outsource parts of their production to firms in developing countries. Even all of their manufacture, for instance, the Apple phone doesn't get manufactured in America. If you look at the back of an Apple product, you will see over there they write designed in California, not even USA, they say designed in California, assembled in China. And they don't even tell you where it is manufactured because all the parts come from so many parts of Asia. So therefore, these are contractual relations with certain kind of governance norms. The governance norms may not only specify technical matters, like what is the quality, what is the specification, but also may include labor matters. Nowadays, more and more, with pressure from buyers and from international organizations and from workers around, the buyers are having to, the retailers, the brands are having to introduce certain kinds of labor norms into their governance system. How they are implemented, to what extent, that's another question. But these are also entering into contracted relations between the parent firm and the outsourced producers. The firm strategy or the type of relation that a firm sets up, employment relations, is also influenced by other institutions. Okay, one institution we refer to as the law. This is what is called in economic terms, it's called a slow-moving institution. It changes it doesn't change rapidly, it changes once in a while. For instance, we have laws, labor laws, which go back to more than 100 years. They haven't changed much. So law is a slow-moving institution. But the actual practices that firms follow are relatively fast-moving institutions. So you may have no change in the laws, but you may actually have changes in practices. So something else is driving it. So there's a distinction made between the fast-moving and the slow-moving institutions. So we have to see all of this set of factors as finally determining what we see as an outcome, which is the employment relations prevailing in a country, in an economy, in a firm, in an industry. It's not just the law, it's all of these economic factors together which bring this about. Now, in bringing this about, there are of course conflicts. There is obviously a conflict at one level, that employers might try to reduce wage costs, while workers might try to maximize their wages. It looks like this is the basic conflict, and often we look at it as a zero-sum game, that if there's more for profit, there's less for wages. But if we look in a more dynamic manner, in a manner that there may be certain, to put it in a simple sense, there may be certain feedback loops which go back from wages to profits. There are, to put it in a more theoretical manner, there are two kinds of approaches to the firm. One is the standard neoclassical theory of the firm, which we owe to Robert Coase and Edith Penrose, etc., that the firm is a collection of resources. An entrepreneur or an employer buys some equipment, land, factors of the factory, etc. These are resources, and workers are also a resource, and so these resources are brought together and production takes place. But a more dynamic theory of the firm says that there are not only resources, there are also capabilities to use those resources. To put it in a simple way, I may have a bicycle, but I may not have the capability to use that bicycle. So I have a resource, but I don't have the capability to use it. I may have a computer, but not have the capability to use it. So workers and the firms have to develop capabilities to use these resources. XLRI is not just a number of teachers. It's a teachers who have developed capabilities to teach a certain type of subject for management students. Not only that, they've also developed certain systems and routines. You have your courses, you have the entire system of examinations, the way you do your the term papers, etc. These are not things which are reproduced just in one day. If you set up another institute, if a new person were to come and set up an institute, it will take many years before it can become and function the way that XLRI functions. So there is a capability that is involved in production. It's not simply that you buy resources and deploy them. There's a capability to deploy resources, utilize resources. Therefore, workers are part of that capability. Very much part of it. It's not just management. Workers, if there is a simple way in which they learn, which we know from Kenneth Arrow, and the learning by doing, where you by rote learn something. Okay? You operate a machine and you begin to learn how to use that machine, and your productivity goes up. I remember when asking a medium-sized electronics producer in Noida, we asked him, why are you worried about having experienced workers on the assembly line? It doesn't make much of a difference in assembly line work, just putting one piece into the right slot. He says, no, it does make a difference. A worker takes at least a few weeks to be able to keep up with the speed of the assembly line, and I don't want to lose those few weeks. So I do want to retain the workers. So the capability that workers develop, if they are specific to the firm, then the firm may try to retain them, and they will have to have systems of employment that will retain the skilled workers. You see this very often, that even when you have fitters and welders who are being trained and multi-skilled, then the firm tries to retain them, and they move from contract labor situation to giving them a permanent type of relationship, a permanent contract, a permanent job. So there is a link between the development of workers' capabilities, which is what you study in HR, and the profits of a firm. The more the employment systems are such that develop capabilities, it will also have an impact on profits and on competitiveness. Ask yourself this question: why did the Japanese outcompete the Americans in automobile production? The technology was not different. There was no difference. They were using the same basic technology. It is just that they shifted from a tailorist assembly line to what they call the quality circles. And that involved the workers in making improvements on the shop floor. Now, will a worker make improvements on the shop floor if there is no incentive to do it? Without security of employment, will a worker make improvements? Why should they do it? They won't do it. There is no incentive for them. So a system where improvements are supposed to be made or wanted from the workers will have to require some security of tenure and even delegation of some manner of shop floor responsibility. I hear that Tata Steel, for instance, which became one of the lowest cost steel producers in the world. They did two things. One is they learned how to utilize the bad Indian coal, which is a very variable quality. But in doing that, they also involved the workers in various types of improvements, which then allowed them to bring down the rate of wastage and therefore increase the rate of, brought down the cost of production. So if you want to involve workers in that, if there's a link between workers and production and profits, then certain types of employment relations are required. Now, firms don't use only one kind of employment relation. They often use at least two. They use one for what perhaps called the core functions of a firm, right? The core competence. They will use one type of relation there because their basic profit depends on that, where they will have very good system of employment relation, maybe security of tenure, higher than market wages, and then on the other side, for the ancillary production, like say, stocking the steel and the stockyard, loading it onto the trucks, this type of work, they use sweated labor. So it's not unusual to have two types of employment relations within a firm. at the same time. They also do it when they outsource the labor. So they outsource it to another firm, which may then utilize sweated labor rather than the original firm itself doing it. So this is then the background in which we have to look at labor reform and employment relations. The question that we need to see is, okay, in which direction does Indian manufacturing, we're dealing mainly with manufacturing, or take industry as a whole, in which direction does it need to move? Are we having a problem that we are not, that wages are too high, and therefore we are not having a low cost of production in order to be able to compete with China or other countries? Or is it that our methods of production, technology, not only technology, but even the way it is deployed, utilizing workers, are such that we are not able to get that productivity from our workers as is got in other countries? You know, Chinese wages are at least 3 to 4 times higher than Indian wages. But how is it that they have a much lower unit cost of production? It's not only the scale. People think that China just is, cheap labor, factories with high scale. No. If you look at you all must be having a look at Harvard Business Review. In a recent issue of the Harvard Business Review, there's a whole discussion on why China has achieved high productivity. It's a matter of involving workers in being able to reduce waste, to increase the rates at which machinery is utilized, to reduce downtime in utilization of machinery, and all of these factors which have allowed that. These are all small improvements, what we call process innovations. These are not product innovations. They're not making new products, but to improve the process of production, which very much involves the manner in which you employ workers, and you can bring down costs and be an effective low-cost producer. On the other hand, we have very low wages in India, but we don't have these systems of production which will allow us to have a be low-cost producers. In this, therefore, let's look at, I will just briefly, as I said, look at the different types of major reforms that have been suggested or asked for. The main discussion will take place later on. But just to look a little bit at it, one is, of course, this whole thing about having flexible contracts. There's a big discussion on this, and I would really like you all to investigate this. Do this in your term paper and your investigation. Are these firms really reducing or changing over a year, within the space of a year, do they really change the number of workers employed? I don't think they do that very much. Only one or two industries have that problem. The garment industry in India, for instance, does, but not because of the problem of not having, being able to keep workers on. Our garment industry has a very peculiar problem. We are basically only based on cotton fabrics. We don't have an export base in synthetic fabric garments. And the reason for that is simple. We have a monopoly in India. Every time there is an import of lower cost polyester from East Asia or anywhere else, the government puts an anti-dumping duty on that. The price goes up. Our monopoly gets a extra monopoly profit, and we are not competitive in the world market. So though the world market for garments is largely growing much faster in synthetics, we have no place in it. We only export cotton-based garments. So how can we have a full year of production? We don't have that. Bangladesh has that. Other countries have it, but India does not. So this is our big issue. Now, within that, they want more and more. The employers are asking for more and more flexibility. One of the issues which will keep coming up, of course, is that of laying off workers. And there is a manner of threshold. You see, we have different laws at different thresholds. If you are more than 10 workers or more, you're under the Factories Act. If you are 100 workers or more, you're under the Industrial Disputes Act. So these create what are called thresholds. So a small employer doesn't want to go up to 10, he wants to remain below 10. So he is not under the regulatory gaze of the Factories Act. So they remain below that. To escape from the Industrial Disputes Act, you remain below 100 workers. So you have a person setting up, not growing from, say, 90 workers to 180 or 200 workers, but setting up another unit which is legally registered as another separate company, and therefore escaping the Industrial Disputes Act. Now we need to ask this question, can we get away from these thresholds by removing these kind of limits so that if you are employing somebody, producing somebody, you have the same regulation, whether it is one worker, two workers, or 10,000 workers. So everybody is brought within the organized and therefore the system where you have to follow these systems of regulation. Now this would even apply to those who employ domestic workers. Why not for them? Why should they not have the same rights of the holidays, overtime, etc. as others do? So that is one type of issue. The second one is that of equal pay for equal wages. This is accepted by everybody but not actually done. So you have contract workers and permanent workers doing exactly the same work, working on the assembly line but getting different wages. Now employers are beginning to realize that this was the source of trouble. And it happened in Gurgaon, Manesa, and now the lesson is spreading to employers around. That you can't have two sets of workers being paid different wages doing the same job. Okay, there are some other issues, but the overall point I would just like to end with this, that we need to look at the labor reforms in the light of the strategy that we want to develop Indian manufacturing and other kinds of industry. Do we want it to be a sweated type of manufacturing, which it already is, but do we want to move to producing lower cost, better quality, but not through sweated labor, but through better utilizing our employing labor in an employment system that provides more benefits and more incentives to improve the types of production. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We would like to wrap up this inaugural ceremony with a small vote of thanks from Professor Shantanu Sarkar.
Thank you, for very thoughtful speech. Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, for your introductory speech, which was not just a theme of also held us in getting a bit of on the current role of ILO. It has also helped us in setting a tone of the seminar. Before I begin thanking people on the dais, I think it's a time for us to just remember what John Buchanan, in his general introduction to the nations of today, noted that a hasty reformer who does not remember the past shall find himself condemned to repeat it. So I think the time has come in the era of globalization where we discuss reforms, labor laws and governance, the lessons learned from the past don't go waste according to me unless we retreat. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all the delegates on the dais, to the distinguished panelists and moderator for taking out time from their busy schedule in coming down to XLRI and willing to share their views in the panel discussion on a particular theme. I sincerely thank Father Abraham, Director of XLRI, and Professor Chandra Ray, Dean of XLRI, for the welcome address and delivering the inaugural remarks, and for being a constant support to the intellectual discourse of the time. Our special thanks to Mr. Raghavan and Ms. Christy Nathan from ILO Conference for extending the support and coordinating with the team of XLRI in hosting the seminar. It will not be fair on my part if I fail to thank my colleague Professor Shyamsundar and the entire team of FIREX who jointly could make this seminar happen today at XLRI. Thank you all once again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now disperse for a small break. Kindly assemble for 15 minutes. We have refreshments outside. We would now like to begin with the technical session for this seminar. I would like to call upon the dais the panelists which we have today with us. I would like to request Dr. Praveen Sinha, Senior Advisor, Trade Unions and Industrial Relations, Frederick Albert Stipley, Secretary General, Indian Industrial Relations Association, New Delhi, to kindly come up on the dais. Please, sir. And I will request the Secretary of FIREX, Sumit, to kindly present him with a souvenir. Welcome, sir. I would now like to request Center for Economic Studies and Planning, School of Social Sciences and Chairperson, Center for Informal Sector and Labour, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, to kindly come up and take his place on the dais. Please, sir. He will be presented with a token of appreciation by the Choir Secretary. Call upon the dais, Mr. Chandrasekhar Prakash Singh, President, ILTUC, Bihar. We have a small token of appreciation from Mr. Singh by a junior finance member. Welcome, sir. I would now like to request Mr. Shyam Sundar Sharma, All India Legal Advisor, BMS Jaipur, to kindly come up and take his place on the dais. Please, sir. And I would like to request Mr. Raghavan, Asia Pacific Desk Officer, ILO Actual, Bureau of Workers' Activities, Geneva, to kindly come up and take a place on the dais. Please, sir. I would now request Ms. Ramapya Gopalakrishnan, Advocate, Madras High Court, Chennai, and ILO Consultant, to kindly come up on the dais and take a seat. Please, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. And finally, I would like to request Ms. Christine Nathan, former Regional Specialist on Workers' Activities, ILO Actual, Bangkok, to kindly come up and take a place on the dais. Please, ma'am. Open the technical session. I would like to request Dr. Praveen Sinha to kindly take over from here. Please, sir.
Thank you, Narayan. Hello, candidates. My name is Juan, and I request Dr. Shyam Sundar also to join us at the dais, please. Media special request. अच्छा ऐसा है, first of all, I request अपने अपने सेल फोन बंद कर। तो नारा है रिक्वेस्टेड twice और फिर भी किसी के बजे। म्यूजिक मेरे को पसंद है, लेकिन for at least these 2 hours, let's close it and let's respect each other. Second thing is that we had the background statement by Professor Devan. काफी एक्सटेंसिव था, काफी to the point. Now, in this session, it's not only your physical presence, but mental presence is also required. In the sense कि हम लोग डिवाइड करेंगे 50-50. 50% is my fellow panelists will share their experience in the background of the objective of this panel discussion and also what Professor Prima has said. And the remaining 50% is or should be monopolized by students and other participants. It's a request and it's an order also. Okay, I try to place a scenario in front of us that what we are going to do. और वो इसलिए कि जो हमने सुना उसको कॉन्टेक्स्ट में लाना जरूरी है, खासकर जो फंक्शनरी हैं और शॉप फ्लोर लेवल पे एंड दोज who are going to be functioning either from management or from worker side in times to come. That is my experience. कल किसी ने प्राइम मिनिस्टर की स्पीच सुनी थी, आपने सुनी? What about all of you? Yes. You are busy in preparation under the guidance of Professor Sam. There are certain hint that was given by the Prime Minister, and that was the future of what India is expected to be, and what are the peculiar advantages, the situation that we are in. And one of the primary factors जो उन्होंने शेयर किया that 65% of the Indian population is below the age of 35 years. And in a world where age, especially workforce age, has become major concern, India comes out as one of the young countries which would be supplier of workforce, not within but also outside the country. And he said कि हम पूरे संसार को वर्क को सप्लाई करेंगे, and for that he emphasized the skilled labor so that we can match the requirement of various nations. Another issue, another two development, in fact the two statistics that has recently declared the finding of the National Sample Survey and the 2011 Census Survey. तो जो हमारे इश्यू को रेलेवेंस मिलता है, स्पेशली जब हम एक सिनेरियो को बिल्ड कर रहे हैं. NSSO कहता है कि there are about 484 million workforce, not employed, but workforce. And of that, 77% is male, and the remaining 23% is female. But if we look at the population, there is equal divide between men and women. It indicates that the participation of women workforce in the case of India is far less than expected, only 23% odd. Another factor that comes is that of those employed to काम कर रहे हैं, 52% are self-employed. 52% वो हैं जो अपने लिए काम करते हैं. About 18% वो हैं जो रेगुलर जॉब करते हैं, सैलरीड जॉब, रेगुलर एम्प्लॉयड हैं, फुल टाइम एम्प्लॉयड, and the remaining 30% are those who are casual or non-documented workers. Which means if you look at the whole figure, 52% self-employed and 30% non-documented workers. Almost 80% who have non-regular employment, non-contract. And that's a major concern, even if we are looking at the contract workers. एक और point taken to us. The Prime Minister said that we have to promote manufacturing sector. क्यों? क्योंकि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर एक सेक्टर है जिसमें एम्प्लॉयमेंट ज्यादा है. But if you look at the situation again given by the sample survey, almost 50% are in agriculture, contributing about 18% in GDP of the country. Manufacturing sector only accounts for 24%, but here is 27%. It is the services sector which only accounts for about 25%, but contributes about 55%. Which implies that the growth in recent years, especially post 1991, has been services-led. Two indicators. One, the employment relation mostly is of informal nature. Second, the growth has been service sector-led. The government plan is to enter into manufacturing in a major way and be supplier of labor force to the world sector. He also talked about employment and employability. When we talk about skill, it is employability. When we talk about self-employed, casual worker, and contract worker, we talk about employment and conditions of work. Almost 80% are those whose conditions of work cannot be said to be in the language of ILO decent. There is a great decent deficit in the employment of almost 80% of the workforce. And if I quote the statement of the former chairman of National Commission on Unemployment, Professor Arjun Sengupta, and he gave very disheartening statement. He said 80% of the Indian population live on 20 रुपया per day. और हम अपने आप को वर्ल्ड की लार्जेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी कहते हैं. We have laws. 43 central laws and almost 160 state laws. क्योंकि labor and industry in the concurrent list of the constitution is both central government को और state government को power है laws बनाने के लिए. Rightly so, क्योंकि conditions differences, industry focus difference, and another this is required. लेकिन उससे हुआ क्या? The governance has got to the law. We have law, but the workforce remains unprotected. What we have said earlier. The कानून बने हैं लेकिन उसका पालन नहीं होता. कर्म है लेकिन उसका solution नहीं. So we have law to set rules, but rules are made, but it's not implemented. There is a conflict of intention and content that laws were borrowed from the former government. The intentions we made, we amended, but it used to be same, and as such we have conflict between intention and intent. The governance, again I come back to the statement of the new government because that is what we are going to see the next at least 5 years, if not more. The government says that our focus is not making law, but to see that the same law is implemented properly. And to that extent, he gave a disturbing statement that he will remove those laws according to his understanding, according to bureaucrat understanding, which are non-professional. And that development, if take place, is going to will direct impact yours and my life at the workplace, will directly impact your way of working at the workplace. The recent four laws have been proposed by the Rajasthan state government. Mention was made by Devnath. But there are 4 specific laws: law relating to minimum wages, law relating to Factory Act, and law relating to exemption of furnishing returns and maintenance of registered bicycle establishment and filing Apprentice Act. And whatever proposal has been given, it goes directly, except in the minimum wage, act directly against the interest of the workplace. Now, with this background, I introduce my panelists. I have 8 knowledgeable, highly knowledgeable panelists, experienced panelists, academicians हैं, trade unionists हैं, and ILO. Component is in the background of our objective. Objective क्या है? कानून क्या लागू नहीं हुए? हमारी सोशल पार्टनर्स की ट्रेड यूनियन की स्ट्रेटेजी है, इफेक्टिव नहीं हुई. 15 सितंबर को there was a labor conclave and a lot of decision was taken, but I don't think it will have different consequence than the other 3 meetings had. Do we need to stage strategy? Do we need to have more understanding of the workplace situation? Do we need to develop different mode of dealing with labor laws and the governance? And I think for that purpose, there is need for kind of closer relation between academia and the functionary. And I think that is the basic background for this whole exercise that we are taking since morning. So I now move on to our panelists, and may I first invite Professor, my namesake, Professor Praveen Jha from Jawaharlal University, very active in the field of labor specifically, and more in the field of informal sector. Praveen Jha, please. Each one has 10 minutes.
Distinguished chair, distinguished panelists, colleagues from the institution, XLRI, and from various trade unions, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I have prepared a short paper, but I don't think it has been circulated to you. And the title of this paper will convey what I wish to say. The title is lies, damn lies, and labor market rigidity in India. Labor market rigidity has been put in inverted commas. तो विषय घेरा हुआ है लूप, पर मूल बात जो मैं कहना चाहता हूं अपनी चर्चा के माध्यम से कि ये एक ऐसा विषय है जिसको लेके बहुत ही चर्चा हो रही है, लेकिन उसका आधार जो है, बेसिक फाउंडेशन जो है, वो इतना स्लिपरी है कि खास करके हिंदुस्तान के संदर्भ में, और हिंदुस्तान के संदर्भ में नहीं बल्कि जो एक वर्तमान वैश्विक व्यवस्था है उसके संदर्भ में भी, कि इसको दूसरे ढंग से देखना पड़ेगा। ये कहते हुए कि इस फ्रेमवर्क में जो थोड़ा ये बदल दो, थोड़ा ये चेंज कर दो, अपने आप में एक ऐसी सोच है जो शायद समझिए कि एक बच्चों के खेल की तरह से, जिससे कुछ होना जाना नहीं। तो जो मूल सवाल है वो पूछने बड़े आवश्यक है। फंडामेंटली व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू टेल यू इज दैट दिस होल क्वेश्चन of labor market reforms and the presumed rigidity of labor market in India, or for that matter, large parts of the world. ILO stats in fact tells you that currently of the total global labor force, close to about 47% are in what is known as the vulnerable employment. Countries in the West, for instance, so-called developed countries, seem to be in pretty serious soup. Talking of close to 20% or so in vulnerable employment. जब उस वहां जो देश है, जब उनकी ये स्थिति, तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि हिंदुस्तान जैसे देश में क्या होगा। प्रवीण बता रहे थे वो एनसीओ रिपोर्ट का हवाला देते हुए कि जो वल्नरेबल सेक्शंस है अपने, इनफैक्ट सेकुता साहब ने उसको कहा था प्योर एंड वल्नरेबल, जिस कैटेगरी की बात कर रहे थे। तो यहाँ पे जो है हमारा लेबर मार्केट का तकरीबन 90% से ज्यादा जो है वो उस हिस्से में जाता है। लेटेस्ट इकोनॉमिक सेंसस आपको बताएगा कि अभी हाल में आया है कि ऑफ द टोटल एंटरप्राइजेस इन इंडिया, ऑल इकोनॉमिक एंटरप्राइजेस, जस्ट अबाउट 1% इज व्हाट इज यू कैन कॉल द ऑर्गेनाइज्ड इन द फॉर्मल सेक्टर, राइट? 99% इज व्हाट इज योर इनफॉर्मल अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर, एज अ सेक्टर। दैट इज द स्टोरी दैट वी गेट फ्रॉम द लेटेस्ट इकोनॉमिक सेंसस, राइट? If you look at, for instance, only the manufacturing, close to 95% of all our manufacturing is very, very small, tiny kind of entities, in which, as it happens, the average number of workers is just 2.4. It has actually come down during the last decade or so from 2.9, right? So you can imagine what is happening even in, without any issue of threshold, which Devanathan very correctly pointed out. Right? It's not a question of sort of any restrictions within that. Nonetheless, what are we witnessing? A significant coming down in terms of the number of workers. Essentially, what's happening? Essentially, what we have had is what many people have called job-less growth, if not a growth which have initiated the process of job losses. Right? So we sort of need to be very, very careful about what is the larger trajectory and story. If I refer to the most powerful economy in the world, US, let me give you just one stat which puts things in perspective. Around 1970 or so, General Motors was supposed to be the iconic company. Lyndon Johnson, the President of the United States, then had said, what is good for General Motors is good for United States of America. At that point in time, the wage gap between the CEO of General Motors and the shop floor worker was 1:70. The average worker को जो है 1 रुपया मिलता था, तो जो चीफ थे उनको 70 रुपया मिलता था। ये उस समय की हालत है जब वो जनरल मोटर्स आपका आइकॉनिक कंपनी था। Of course, Western Europe, the gap was much smaller. The Scandinavian countries, the gap was even smaller. Right? Scandinavia it was 1:4, 1:6. And so, sort of, if there was a kind of a paradise of earth from the point of view of workers, it was possibly that part of the world. Right? Abhi kya halat? US. Walmart is the iconic company today. Right? What is the gap? 1:1400. आप समझ सकते हैं कि क्या हुआ है दुनिया के सबसे पावरफुल इकोनॉमी में वर्कर्स के साथ। The gap has increased on an average very, very dramatically. Stiglitz points out that on an average, if you take a large number of corporations together, it was roughly 1:50 or so in the US around early 70s. Today it is 1:500.
Right? Real wages in that economy have stagnated for most of this part, and if you compare early 70s and the latest figures, it's actually a small fall. तो दुनिया के सबसे पावरफुल इकोनॉमी में रियल वेज वर्कर्स का जो है वो घटा है. तो ये बैकग्राउंड है. ऐसी स्थिति में आपको सबसे पहला सवाल ये पूछना है कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ मॉडल ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन आर यू टॉकिंग अबाउट. नाउ let's not use expressions in a slippery fashion. Globalization. Globalization क्या होता है? कुछ नहीं होता है. You have to give it more content, more meaning, more sense. What we have is what many of us call neoliberal globalization. जब तक इसको हम केंद्र में नहीं रखेंगे, जो पिछले 20-25 वर्षों में हो रहा है, आप उसको नहीं समझ सकते. So that is the crux of it. Right? So unless you really question this model of globalization, right? Globalization per se can be good. There can be all kinds of positive linkages, etc., etc. Right? In fact, the socialists were the first ones to give a call for globalization. जो लेफ्ट के लोग थे वो उन्होंने जो आज से 150 साल पहले ग्लोबलाइजेशन की बात की थी, कहा था कि अच्छी चीज है, लेकिन that was a completely different model of globalization. ये जो नव उपनिवेशवाद किस्म का जो वैश्वीकरण है, इसमें वर्कर्स के लिए कोई संभावना नहीं है. जब तक आप वहां से शुरू नहीं करेंगे, जैसा मैंने पहले कहा, बच्चों का खेल खेलना, झुंझुना बजा है, और चाहे वो ILO के रिपोर्ट्स हो, चाहे और भी कुछ हो, ये सब जो बातचीत हो रही है वो काफी निरर्थक हो जाता है उस संदर्भ में. तो उस तरीके से आपको देखना होगा. So I just wanted to set the tone because what I'm trying to say is possibly very sort of different from possibly the overall tenor and tone of what was discussed in the inaugural session. Right? Even though I agree with some of the very specific suggestions, for instance, which were advanced by Professor Devanathan and other colleagues in the panel, but in terms of the larger perspective and the context and how do you approach globalization, workers' rights, etc., I probably come from a very different sort of perspective. Right? That was the first point I wanted to make. Couple of other points. What is the economic theory of globalization? Right? If you look at the literature, we have a large literature on this. Very large literature. Right? For lack of time, I cannot get into details of it, but let me just tell you that even the most right-wing institutions, if you look at some of their reports, they basically come and tell us that look, this whole conception and notion that we need labor market flexibility in a lock, stock and barrel sense is something which is completely misplaced. मैं IDB की बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं IMF की बात कर रहा हूँ, मैं वर्ल्ड बैंक की बात कर रहा हूँ, तो ऊपर में हेडलाइन बना होता है कि सब फ्लेक्सिबलाइज कर दो. आप उन्हीं के रिपोर्ट्स को पढ़ना शुरू कीजिए और बड़े अच्छे आपको उसमें सेंस मिलेंगे जिसमें कहा जाता है नहीं कई चिंताएं, कई संभावनाओं को आपको देखना होगा. तो वो जो फाइन प्रिंट है उसमें वो खुद भी कहते हैं. तो इकोनॉमिक थियरी इसकी जो है ना वो इतनी स्पष्ट है. देव ने कुछ बताया था आपको कि वो वेज वाला जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, आपको ग्रेट डिप्रेशन क्या था, 1920s 30s का ग्रेट डिप्रेशन जो था और जिसको लेके जॉन मेनार्ड केन्स ने चर्चा की थी, दैट वाज द मैसिव मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक फेलियर ऑफ अ फ्री लेसे फेयर काइंड ऑफ इकोनॉमिक कॉन्टेक्स्ट, जिसमें कि आप जो है वर्कर्स को जितना कंप्रेस कर सकते हैं. तो क्या हुआ, यू हैव मिलियंस ऑफ मशीन्स and millions of workers, they didn't come together. This in one sentence was the Great Depression. And this had happened precisely because of the macroeconomic compression, which essentially was connected with compression of wages. Right? That was at the crux of it. John Maynard Keynes, the so-called Keynesian revolution, वो क्या करता है? और कुछ नहीं तो गड्ढा खोदो, उसमें मिट्टी डालो, at the end of the day कुछ पैसा दे दो लोगों को, इकोनॉमी रिवाइव कर जाएगी. Right, so I think there is so much of. I have done a lot of careful I've spent a lot of time, looking at some of the theoretical literature. And as it happens, ILO has published that. So if you're interested, you can look at this survey of all the arguments, theoretical arguments. ये 2008 का एक पब्लिकेशन है, जिसमें मैंने इसी चीज को कि क्या है थियरी और थियरी कितना सतही है, कितना स्लिपरी है, कितना बकवास है. उसके साथ मैं बस 1 मिनट और दूंगा. मैं चूंकि उसमें विस्तार से हम लोग नहीं जा सकते हैं, लेकिन हिंदुस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जो है आपको काफी लिटरेचर जो ये कहता है कि जिस किस्म का चाहे थ्योरेटिकल चाहे एम्पिरिकल, दो तरह के काम हो सकता है ना इसके सपोर्ट में, जो एडवोकेट्स हैं लेबर मार्केट फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी के. So if you look at either the theoretical work or the empirical work, either rest of the world or India, whatever, and if you do a careful survey of it, you know, any sort of rejection of this kind of advocacy becomes very easy. बहुत आसान है. ये जो पूरा एक एडवोकेसी है ना कि हिंदुस्तान का लेबर मार्केट रिजिड है, इसको फ्लेक्सिबलाइज कर दो इत्यादि इत्यादि. आखिरी बात जो मैं कहना चाहता हूं, और मैं आपको I can get into all kinds of details during the course of discussion later if we have the time. There's some of the things which are happening. Let us not fool ourselves. What is happening is a massive attack in last 4 months on the rights of workers. Massive attack in terms of an accelerated attack. The attack didn't start 4 months ago. The attack started very much during the UPA era itself, or even before that, early 90s onwards. तो लेकिन अभी जो हो रहा है, और जैसा हम जानते हैं कि 31 जुलाई को जो राजस्थान असेंबली ने जो पास किया है, अब उसका क्या सिग्निफिकेंस है? If I just want to highlight, तो I'll just wind up in a minute or so. ये जो राजस्थान सरकार से मैं शुरू कर रहा हूं आपको, और उसको कई और सरकारों ने सपोर्ट किया है. यूनियन गवर्नमेंट उसकी चर्चा भी कर रही है. सो एसेंशियली चैप्टर 5B इंडस्ट्रियल डिस्प्यूट्स एक्ट का जो एक रिक्वायरमेंट है कि एम्प्लॉयर इन एस्टैब्लिशमेंट एम्प्लॉइंग ओवर 100 वर्कर्स, उसको हम कह रहे हैं ओवर 300 वर्कर्स. उसमें जो इंटरेस्टिंग चीज है अब ये है, एक बहुत बड़ी चीज जो हिंदुस्तान के आर्थिक परिदृश्य में हुआ है कि देयर हैज बीन मैसिव इनफॉर्मलाइजेशन ऑफ द फॉर्मल सेक्टर. फॉर इंस्टेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर करेंटली जो सो कॉल्ड ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर आपका है, उसमें जहां लीगली आप कैन नॉट एम्प्लॉय कॉन्ट्रैक्ट वर्कर्स, राइट, their current count of informal workers is 55% as per the most recent data, right? So उसमें जो भी आपका कॉन्ट्रैक्ट वर्कर है ये 300 अकाउंट में नहीं आएगा. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Likewise, अगर आप देखें कि ये जो हो रहा है कि मेंबरशिप ऑफ यूनियन जो है, कितना वर्कर आपको चाहिए टू बी रिकॉग्नाइज्ड एज ए यूनियन, तो 15 से 30% हो गया है. इसी तरह से आप देखें कि जो उन्होंने पास किया है कि वर्कर्स इंडल्जिंग इन गो स्लो इफ रिफरेंस लेड ऑफ टर्मिनेटेड विल नॉट बी एंटाइटल्ड टू एनी कॉम्पनसेशन एज पर द प्रपोज्ड चेंजेस. Floor for application of Contract Labour Act has been increased from 20 to 50 now. Right? तो राजस्थान ने ये किया है, और भी राज्य सरकारें उस दिशा में बढ़ रही हैं. और उसके अलावा जो और भी जैसे अप्रेंटिसशिप एक्ट है, मिनिमम वेज एक्ट है, तकरीबन सारी चीजें जो हो रही है उस दिशा में जा रही हैं, which is extremely adverse for the workers. And let me also remind you that actually all this is in violation of Article 254 of our Constitution. Article 254 mentions expressly that, and I am quoting it, that any attempt by state governments to legislate changes in the national laws are supposed to be done only for further enhancement or improvement of the rights of citizens and not downgrade them. That is in direct violation of that. Right? So, in short, this sort of let's not as I said, live in a somewhat usually unreal world. You have to see that it's basically talking of very serious, very concerted attack on workers, and also larger model economic framework of globalization that we have is something within which there is very little prospect for any enhancement of workers' well-being and rights. Thank you.
Okay, let me invite the second speaker in the name of Mr. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So the second speaker is Mr. Prakash Singh, and he is ये है अध्यक्ष बिहार इंडियन ट्रेड यूनियन कांग्रेस के. So those who are not from trade union students, you don't know about much. They do many positive work, so you listen to him properly. He is also active at the national level.
सबसे पहले प्रवीण सिन्हा जी को हम विशेष रूप से धन्यवाद देना चाहते हैं कि वो समय उन्होंने मुझको दिया, लेकिन ये जो 10 मिनट का टाइम है उसमें मार्जिन भी है 5 मिनट। तो ये इसमें हमने देखा 10 मिनट टाइम दिए, 5 मिनट बाद भी दिए, मतलब कुल मिला के 15 मिनट का समय। हम कोशिश करेंगे बिल्कुल कि आपके घंटी बजाने के पहले हम ये बात को खत्म करें। मंच पर बैठे हुए हमारे और राघवन जी, रेस्पेक्टेड राघवन जी, रेस्पेक्टेड मिस नाथन, रेस्पेक्टेड KR श्याम सुंदर जी, प्रवीण झा जी, रेस्पेक्टेड प्रवीण झा जी, हमारे सभी सेंट्रल यूनियन के AITUC, BMH, SMH, HMS और CITU, ILTUC के सभी हमारे प्रतिनिधि साथीगण, XLRI के छात्र छात्राएं और भी जो हमारे कुछ लोग आए हैं और दूसरे संगठन के लोग हैं, उन सबको पहले हम इंटेक की तरफ से, ILTUC की तरफ से आपका स्वागत करते हैं, वेलकम करते हैं। और 2-4 बात हम कुछ जरूर कहना चाहेंगे। हमारी बातें और लोग जो रखे हैं उनसे कुछ डिफरेंस जरूर हो सकता है, क्योंकि ट्रेड यूनियन को हम बराबर देखते हैं कि एक रिसर्च का, लगता है कि रिसर्च का विषय हो गया इस देश में, कि मजदूरों के ऊपर केवल रिसर्च हो रहा है, और जिस पर रिसर्च हो रहा हो आप उसकी गति समझ सकते हैं कि उनका क्या हो, वो क्या हो रहा है। जैसे नए कोई जो हॉस्पिटल में आप जाएंगे, मेडिकल कॉलेज के छात्र छात्राएं लगते हैं, कोई मरीज पकड़ा गए तो उनके ऑपरेशन के समय में उनको क्या क्या रिसर्च उस पर करते हैं आप समझ सकते हैं। तो ये इस देश में ये दुर्भाग्य है कि लेबर के ऊपर क्यों रिसर्च हो रहा है। मतलब रिसर्च होने का मतलब है कि हम लोगों को कहीं ना कहीं गुमराह करके ये कहा जा रहा है शांत रहो, अब कुछ हो जाएगा, अब कुछ हो जाएगा, अब कुछ हो जाएगा। लड़ने का जरूरत नहीं है। आप देखिए इस चीज को दो हिस्से में बांट के अगर हम लोग देखें, देश आजाद हुआ, आजादी के बाद कानून बना, कुछ कानून तो फ्री इंडिपेंडेंस है जिसको अभी कोई चेंज करने की बात है, लेकिन चलो बीच में उसमें भी चेंज हुआ। लेकिन अगर आजादी के बाद हम मान के चले तो 40 वर्ष 40 ईयर्स का जो हमारा एक टाइम था, वो टाइम था जिसको हम इंस्पेक्टरेट राज करते थे, जिसमें केवल ऑर्गेनाइज वर्कर, रेल के मजदूर, पोस्टल के मजदूर, गवर्नमेंट के मजदूर या बड़े बड़े जो ऑर्गेनाइज फल कारखाने पब्लिक सेक्टर के थे, उन्हीं मजदूरों का केवल संगठन इस देश में हुआ करता था। उसके पहले किसी का संगठन नहीं था। कोई कितना भी हो, एग्रीकल्चर लेबर से लेके कंस्ट्रक्शन लेबर से लेके डोमेस्टिक वर्कर, जिसकी भी आप बात करते हैं, वो 40 वर्ष में किसी का कहीं कोई न ध्यान गया, न गवर्नमेंट ने कभी इस पर सोचा, न कोई इसके बारे में बात की। बाद में धीरे धीरे हम ILO का आभार व्यक्त करते हैं। ILO ने इस चीज को धीरे धीरे कहीं न कहीं से लोगों का ध्यान आकृष्ट किया। आज भी हम इस देश में क्या लड़ रहे हैं, 87 और 98 के रेटिफिकेशन के लिए गवर्नमेंट क्या कहती है कि हमारा तो संविधान में अधिकार है, आपको मिला हुआ। अरे संविधान में बहुत अधिकार है, तो ये फूड का कानून बनाने का और सब एजुकेशन का कानून बनाने का अलग अलग कानून क्यों बन रहा है? हमारा अधिकार संविधान में है, तो हमारे लिए कोई अलग से कानून नहीं बनेगा, संविधान से हम गवर्न होंगे। लेकिन आज भी इस देश में आपको मालूम होना चाहिए, खास करके जो छात्र छात्राएं हैं उनके लिए कहना चाहते हैं कि इस देश में आज भी ट्रेड यूनियन का अधिकार, आज भी लोगों को, करोड़ों ऐसे लोग हैं काम करने वाले जिनको आज भी इस देश में ट्रेड यूनियन का राइट नहीं मिला हुआ है। सरकार बना करके नहीं, ये कानून ये नहीं बना सकती यूनियन, आज भी ये चल रहा है। उसी तरह से कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग है क्या इस देश में? कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग केवल एक कहने का एक मंत्र है कि आप कह करके कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग बोल करके खुश होइए, लेकिन कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग तो उसी के पास है जिसके पास ताकत है। कानून से कोई कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग नहीं है कि आप मैनेजमेंट को कहेंगे कि नहीं, आपको बातचीत करके ही हमसे हमारा चीज तय करना होगा। मैनेजमेंट की इच्छा आपसे बातचीत करे, नहीं इच्छा आपसे बातचीत नहीं करे। कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग एक समझिए एक फोरम डेवलप किया है तो बैठ के आप बात कर सकते हैं। तो हम इसलिए कह रहे हैं कि जो हमारे और भी जिन लोगों ने बात रखा है, तो एक भी चीज आप देखिए कि जो हमने कहा जो 40 वर्ष के बाद चलिए ठीक है 25 वर्ष, अभी का जो ये 25 वर्ष का हमारा 27 वर्ष का जो भी पीरियड है, इसमें न्यू इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी से लेकर के हम शुरू हुए और अभी जो ग्लोबल जो सिस्टम चल रहा है, हम अमेरिका की बात करते हैं, चाइना की बात करते हैं, लेकिन अपने देश की इन्वायरमेंट की बात नहीं करते कि हमारे देश में कितने लोग गरीब हैं, कितने लोग अशिक्षित हैं, कितने लोग ऑर्गेनाइज नहीं हैं। तो इसको आप बात नहीं करेंगे और आप कहेंगे कि साहब इतना प्रोडक्टिविटी वहां ऐसा है, इस तरह का वहां काम हो रहा है, तो ये नहीं चलने वाला। अगर आज इस देश में आजादी के बाद इतने दिनों के बाद हम पूछते हैं कि आज क्यों बात हो रही है, हमने पढ़ा है सांसद जी का एक कहीं इसमें कुछ लिखा हुआ है कि बट रिफॉर्म्स आर नीडेड टू सस्टेन ग्रोथ। तो लेबर रिफॉर्म, तो केवल लेबर रिफॉर्म्स ही क्या सस्टेनेबल ग्रोथ के लिए काम कर सकता है? मैनेजमेंट के रिफॉर्म की कोई जरूरत नहीं है, मैनेजमेंट को बदलने का कोई जरूरत नहीं है। वो जो आप आज हाई प्रॉफिट हजारों हजार करोड़ रुपया जो मैनेजमेंट के लोग मुनाफा कमा रहे हैं, उसको कहीं रोकने का जरूरत है कि नहीं? आप जो उनके लिए कुछ भी जो बात है, हमारे लिए हर चीज में सीलिंग है, मैनेजमेंट के लिए कहीं कोई सीलिंग नहीं। आज भी हम बात कर रहे हैं जो गवर्नमेंट बदली है या नहीं भी बदली थी, आजादी के 67 वर्षों बाद 65 वर्षों बाद ट्रेड यूनियन ने भी कुछ सोचने का प्रक्रिया शुरू किया है। 40 वर्ष तक हम लोगों ने नहीं सोचा कि अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर भी इस देश में है। ये 25 वर्ष में हम लोगों ने सोचना किया कि अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर है। अब हम लोग सोच रहे हैं कि सारे सेंट्रल ट्रेड यूनियनों को इस देश में मिलकर जब ये कॉलिशन गवर्नमेंट का एक सिस्टम बन गया, सरकारी या जो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी है ये सत्ता पर काबिज होने के लिए एक साथ हो सकते हैं डिफरेंट आइडियोलॉजी को लेकर के, तो ट्रेड यूनियन के लोगों ने भी विचार करके किया। और मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं कि इस देश में पहली दफा ट्रेड यूनियनों ने भी एक अपना मंच बनाया है और जिसकी लड़ाई पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजी को छोड़ करके हम लोग लड़ रहे हैं। यूपीए की सरकार में आईएनटीयूसी ने भी विरोध किया और हम भी लड़े, और आज जब बीजेपी की सरकार है, एनडीए की सरकार है, तो बीएमएस के लोग भी उनके खिलाफ बात कर रहे हैं जो लेबर रिफॉर्म के अंतर्गत जो कुछ बातें हो रही हैं। तो ये ऐसा नहीं है कि अब इसमें चेंज को हम लोग अब डिपेंड करेंगे किसी के ऊपर, डिपेंड नहीं करेंगे। ट्रेड यूनियनों ने इस देश के ट्रेड यूनियन विचार कर लिया। अभी अब आप देखिए क्या हम करते हैं, आजादी के इतने दिनों बाद क्या मांग रहे हैं? हम तो नहीं मांग रहे हैं कि हमको क्वार्टर दे दो, हमको और भी चीज दे दो, हम आज भी मांग रहे हैं मिनिमम वेजेस। अब ये हाइट हो गया कि इस देश के मजदूर आज भी न्यूनतम मजदूरी लेने की लड़ाई लड़ रहे हैं, न्यूनतम मजदूरी नहीं मिल रहा। इतने दिनों के बाद सेकंड नेशनल लेबर कमीशन किसके लिए बना? सेकंड नेशनल लेबर कमीशन बना इस देश के जो अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड वर्कर्स हैं उनके लिए, और वो उसका रिकमेंडेशन के कितने दिन हो गए। रिकमेंडेशन के बाद एक कानून बना अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर वर्कर्स के लिए, सोशल सिक्योरिटी एक्ट 2008। अब 2008 के बाद आज 6 वर्ष बीत गए, कोई बता दे हमको कि क्या हुआ उसमें? क्या एक वर्कर्स को भी उस कानून से इस देश में अगर कोई बेनिफिट मिला हो? कोई सरकार का मंत्री, कोई उसका मुलाजिम, कोई ब्यूरोक्रेट बता दे कि कानून बना 2008 में और ये 50 करोड़ असंगठित क्षेत्र का मजदूर है, एक मजदूर को क्या लाभ मिला? कुछ नहीं। तो आप केवल कानून बना के बात करते हैं, तो इस देश में केवल फैक्ट्री में काम करने वाले लोग नहीं है। अब ये समझने का जरूरत है। एक तरफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट का, अब आपको समझने के लिए हम ये कहना चाहते हैं कि जैसे पहले देश में ये आईआईटी पे प्लेसमेंट की बात होती थी, लोग आईआईटी को ज्यादा बिल्डअप करें, एजुकेशन बढ़ेगा। आज इस देश में आईटीआई को भी बिल्डअप किया जा रहा है स्किल डेवलपमेंट के लिए, इसलिए कि जब स्किल डेवलपमेंट होगा, आज हम देखते हैं कि प्लेसमेंट के लिए लोग आईटीआई के इंस्टीट्यूट पे जा रहे हैं। बड़े बड़े जो कंपनियां हैं वो आईटीआई के इंस्टीट्यूट पे जा रही हैं और वहां से लड़कों को सेलेक्ट करके लोग उसका प्लेसमेंट कर रहे हैं, उनको एम्प्लॉयमेंट दे रहे हैं। तो हम इसलिए कहना चाह रहे हैं कि ये जो देश में श्रमिकों के बारे में जो एक सोच है कि सब कुछ हमारे ऊपर ही है। कोई कहता है कॉमेडी क्या है, मतलब हम है क्या? आखिर कोई बताए कि मतलब लेबर को क्या समझते हैं आप? कोई इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इनको समझते हैं कि हम कोई बने आपके एक पार्टनर के रूप में आपके साथ काम कर रहे हैं, आपका पूंजी है, हमारा श्रम है, तो कुछ है कि नहीं? तो आपको सब कुछ मिले। अब हम मांग रहे हैं मिनिमम वेजेस, हम मांग रहे हैं सोशल सिक्योरिटी में, क्या मांग रहे हैं? हम कह रहे हैं भाई हमको पेंशन मिलना चाहिए, रिटायरमेंट के बाद क्या करेंगे? हम जीवन भर काम करें और रिटायरमेंट के बाद हमको एक पैसा नहीं मिले। 1000 मिनिमम पेंशन जो अभी तय हुआ है, इसकी इतनी डंका बज रही है कि हम लोगों ने तो बहिष्कार किया कि हम उस मीटिंग में जाएंगे नहीं। हम लोगों ने सेंट्रल यूनियनों ने हमारे यहाँ तो बहिष्कार किया, बाकी स्टेट का जो भी हो, कि हम लोग नहीं जाएंगे। ये 1000 मिनिमम पेंशन क्या बात करके इसका इतना डंका बजा रहे हैं, कितने लोगों को मिलने वाला है? तो ये और इसके सारे के सारे कैबिनेट मिनिस्टर चले गए इसको फोकस करने के लिए कि हम लोग दे रहे हैं। अब बताइए जरा, एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर इस देश में कितना है, उसके लिए क्या मिल रहा है? एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर क्या वर्कर नहीं है क्या? केवल फैक्ट्री में कारखाना में काम करने वाला वर्कर है? इस देश के ग्रोथ में एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर का पार्टिसिपेशन है कि नहीं? इस देश में, देश के ग्रोथ में कंस्ट्रक्शन लेबर का पार्टिसिपेशन है कि नहीं? तो पार्टिसिपेशन किसका नहीं है? आज केवल एक छोटा सा एक वर्ग का, एक छोटा सा समुदाय का, एक छोटा सा जो क्लास है उसकी बात करके आप कहते हैं कि हम ये कानून में बदल देंगे, ये दे देंगे, और वो भी जो कानून बनता है वो मिलता नहीं। तो हम केवल इतना ही कहना चाहते हैं कि हम लोग काफी दुखी है इस बात से कि जो ट्रेड यूनियन का जो कुछ हक है वो धीरे धीरे कभी होता है बदलेंगे, कभी होता है छोड़ेंगे, कभी कुछ एक स्टेबिलिटी। अब ये गवर्नमेंट में आते आते जो ट्रिपटाइट सिस्टम इस देश में, जो ट्रिपटाइट सिस्टम को हम लोगों ने डेवलप किया कि चलो भाई कानून नहीं बनता है, बने, लेकिन एक त्रिपक्षीय जो वार्ता है जो ILO के पैटर्न पर यहाँ भी हम लोगों ने सब इंडस्ट्री, पब्लिक सेक्टर, लेकिन अभी गवर्नमेंट ने अपने स्तर पर इनका जो ट्रिपटाइट कमिटी था उसको धीरे धीरे इन्होंने बंद करना शुरू किया, खत्म करना शुरू किया। अगर मीटिंग 4 होती थी उस मीटिंग को 1 करना शुरू किया। तो इस तरह से करके धीरे धीरे जो लेबर के साथ इंटरेक्शन है वो भी ये बंद करना चाहते हैं। और तो केवल आप बिग हाउसेस को, केवल मल्टीनेशनल कंपनी को खुश करके नहीं कर सकते। हम अगर मिनिमम वेजेस की बात कर रहे हैं, सोशल सिक्योरिटी की बात कर रहे हैं, इंडस्ट्रियल हाउसेस क्या बात करती है? वो कहती है मुफ्त में जमीन दो, मुफ्त में बिजली दो, मुफ्त में पानी दो, लोन दो। अब लोन दो पर कहने का मतलब कि उनके लिए सब सुविधा है, हमारे लिए कुछ नहीं है। आप लोन की बात उनके लिए कहते हैं। हम एक और एग्जाम्पल देना चाहते हैं कि केवल इंडस्ट्रियल वर्कर की बात मत करिए। अगर देश में कोई बिजनेस डेवलप कर रहा है, कोई एम्प्लॉयमेंट डेवलप कर रहा है, कोई अपना एम्प्लॉयमेंट डेवलप कर रहा है, तो वेंडर्स भी इस देश में है। कितने इंडस्ट्रियल हाउसेज इस देश में हैं जिन्होंने इस देश के कितने लोगों को एम्प्लॉयमेंट दिया है? अगर आप टाटा को मिल लें, रिलायंस को मिल लें, बिरला को मिल लें, गिन लीजिए कितने लोगों को इन लोगों के यहाँ कितना एम्प्लॉयमेंट है? लाख, 2 लाख, 4 लाख, 5 लाख, 10 लाख, 20 लाख, 25 लाख, कितने लोगों का एम्प्लॉयमेंट है? और अगर हम बात करते हैं इस देश में वेंडर जो गरीब लोग हैं, वो गरीब लोग कितने हैं? उनकी संख्या आप देख लीजिए, 2.5 करोड़ 3 करोड़ है। उनके परिवार की संख्या को ले लें तो और ज्यादा होंगे। वो भी एक व्यवसाय चला रहे हैं, तो उनके व्यवसाय को आप इग्नोर करते हैं। क्या आपको समझ में नहीं आता कि वो जो वेंडर्स जो इस देश में है वो गरीबों के इकोनॉमी को चलाते हैं, वही उसके पोषक हैं, वही उसके संरक्षक है। अगर देश में गरीबों के लिए फुटपाथ नहीं हो तो 5 स्टार होटल या मॉल या बड़ा होटल में वो जाके अपने चीज को काम अपना नहीं कर सकते। इसीलिए देश के गरीबों का भी इकोनॉमी चलाने के लिए जो संस्थाएं चल रही हैं, जो काम चल रहा है, उसको भी प्रोटेक्शन मिलना चाहिए। आज मैं कानून हालांकि बड़ा बहुत पढ़ने के बाद परवीन सिन्हा जी को भी उसकी पूरी जानकारी है। तो 1-2 बार अभी टाइम है ना, खत्म हो गया, आपने बताया नहीं थोड़ा, चलिए ठीक है। तो बस हम लास्ट तक कहना चाहते हैं कि देखिए, हम तो ये मानते हैं कि इस देश में ट्रेड यूनियन के लिए एक ही लड़ाई है, और वो लड़ाई है क्या? कौन क्या दे रहा है इस देश को और कौन क्या ले रहा है इस देश से। लड़ाई हम इसको पूरा आपको जो कंक्लूड करके बताना चाहते हैं, कंक्लूडिंग लाइन मेरा यही है कि ट्रेड यूनियन की लड़ाई इस देश में है। कौन क्या दे रहा है और कौन क्या ले रहा है। क्या मजदूर इस देश को क्या दे रहा है और जो लोग हैं इस देश को क्या दे रहे हैं। मजदूर इस देश से क्या ले रहे हैं, उनको क्या मिल रहा है। तो ये ग्रोथ की हम बात करते हैं तो उनका भी हिस्सा है, उनको भी कुछ मिलना चाहिए, उनको चाहे वो किसी सेक्टर में काम करते हो। तो इसलिए हम कहेंगे कि बंटवारे की लड़ाई है, और ये बंटवारा अगर ठीक से नहीं हुआ, हम जो कमाते हैं हमारा हिस्सा अगर बांट करके ठीक नहीं मिला तो ये लड़ाई रुकेगी नहीं, ये लड़ाई आगे बढ़ेगी। 27 भले कुछ दिन बीत गया, लेकिन अभी जो ट्रेड यूनियन की यूनिटी बनी है इस देश में, इस यूनिटी को हम लोग और भी बढ़ाएंगे। और शायद लगता है कि ये 5 वर्ष में भयंकर लड़ाई इस देश में ट्रेड यूनियनों को लड़ने की चुनौती सामने आ रही है। इन्हीं चंद बातों के साथ फिर से आपको बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद चंद्रप्रकाश जी। You know, I have a dilemma. I'm a really major challenge. Left, right, center, all are taking it. Let me invite Mr. Raghavan. Mr. Raghavan is of course from ILO, but more than that, he has a trade union background. And he takes care of labor interests at the global level. Mr. Raghavan.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm trying to do is very quickly make about 5 or 6 points. I think I had spoken a lot about the ILO at the beginning. But what I want to do now is relate to the discussion which is taking place. And it's always difficult to speak after the eloquent speaker that is CBC, but my question. Firstly, I would like to make a point that India wants to be seen as a global player. Present Prime Minister has been making statements, but also India has been saying that the Security Council, they are in G20, they are in BRICS, and they want to be one of the strong and powerful developing market. And so they are seen as one of the strong and influential country playing a global role. The question is, which is all for all of us, is whether India also can be matched in terms of trade union and human rights, that they can be a global player. Why I'm saying this? For the last many years, we've been working with the government of India on saying that you are one of the few countries who has not verified Convention 8798. There were discussions. We were talking with the ministry. Of course, the trade unions were behind it, and as Brother CPC has said, their common platform has got one of their agenda as the ratification of 8798. That has not happened, and now it seems it has gone further backwards in terms of any chance of that being ratified and bringing about the laws and practice in line with those fundamental core conventions, which gives respect to workers, gives respect to industrial relations, gives respect to persons. The second point I want to make is about the challenges in terms of industrial relations. It's not a time to talk in detail about it, but I think you are going through a period where there are challenges in industrial relations. You are you kind of came out of a centralized sort of planned economy. You've attracted investment, foreign influx of industrial relation practices, foreign influx of managers. A time has come where you want to be also attracting foreign investments, but whether your industrial relations at the university level, at the practice level is matching that. Whether your industrial relation is creating the kind of environment where there is less dispute, less conflict, better productivity, better distribution of income which is created by both management and work. That's the challenge in all of it. Our research studies show that where there is collective bargaining, where there is respect, there is less conflicts. There are disputes which are resolved quickly. There are systems to resolve. The distribution of wages, the distribution of income is fair. There is development in the community. That's the challenge I would like to leave with you. The third point I want to make is in terms of what can be done with the current situation with regard to the ILO and the ILO supervised mechanism. Coming from the ILO, I'd like to look at that angle. The ILO has a system. Your government is a member of the ILO. By being a member of the ILO, you have certain obligations. The government has certain obligations to respect what they have signed when they became a member of the ILO. There is a board. There is a system which we call a supervisory mechanism.
I don't know, probably probably I can talk a little bit more about it. But the ILO the supervisory mechanism can be used to bring the government to the ILO system in terms of where they have to answer saying that why they have not done so and so. And at present, if you look at the kinds of violations that are arising out of some of the decisions which are being taken, can be taken up as violations of Convention 87. They have not ratified this convention, but they are bound by this convention because 87 and 98 is part of the constitution of the island. So you are bound, the government is bound by that. So denying the freedom of association, taking away the rights of people, can be violations which can be challenged, and the government can be dragged to the ILO supervising mechanism and asked to answer why they are not respecting. Another point I would like to make is that in relation to that is, and I would plead to the trade union movement here, that there have been very few cases filed with the Committee on Freedom of Association in the last few years. In this region, India is not a country which has got high number, but still, compared to the other parts of the world, this region, the whole Asia Pacific region, has got very few cases which they are filing with the supervisory mechanism in terms of asking for remedial measures. So, plead to the trade union movement that challenge this. Of course, you have got your own power, your own measures, but you can use another tool which has worked. The tool which can be used where what we say is naming and shaming. No government wants to be standing together with the 185 other governments and being told that you are a member of this club, but you are not following the rules of this club. And people don't like that, particularly ministers, all your people who are in the embassy. So this is a play that can be used. Again, like Brother C.P. Singh has said, that the use of the tripartite mechanism, the involvement of the parties which are involved, who has got an interest, the workers and the employers, should be the basis in which to look at whatever changes they can start, which is not so. The last point, Praveen, I want to make is, how can we work together? Because this is also an objective of our exercise here. How can we work together? When I say how we can work together, I'm talking about the ILO, the academia, the trade union leaders, and the students, all the future managers or workers. The issues which are being raised right now in terms of the changes which are being brought about in legislation, always getting a negative press if you look at it in terms of what is being discussed. It's always been like a fight which they are saying. There is a role for the academia to bring about and have a information which is much more balanced. There are many cases here where disputes happen and it has said that the cause of it has been broken. So there is a need for that kind of discussion in the community, in the press, but also backed up by research and studies to show that. Also how trade unions can work the universities, how can they not influence, but how can they take up the issues with the universities and students so that there is a better understanding about the future employees and future workers. What can the university benefit from the trade union leaders who are every day dealing with these issues? How can we as ILO work together? I think these are issues also we'd like to. I see the potential, I see there is need for that, I see we all working together, and I hope that this will be one of the things that will come out of this discussion.
Thank you, Praveen.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Shyam Chandra Sharma ji from BMS, and he has double qualification. He is a trade unionist, but he is a lawyer also. So he is a double challenge.
ममता सिंह, समस्त सम्मानीय महानुभाव एवं बहनें, इस संगोष्ठी में उपस्थित समस्त माननीय प्रसिद्ध शिक्षाविद, मेरे सम जगत के साथीगण, प्रिय युवा विद्यार्थी गण, बंधुएं, बहनों, मैं भी डॉक्टर प्रमोद सिन्हा जी से निवेदन करना चाहता हूं कि ये विषय आपने बहुत अच्छा रखा है, सामयिक है। मेरी तरह से इसमें कुछ बातें कहना चाहता हूँ, हो सकता है कि टाइम ज्यादा चला जाए, लेकिन ये बात पहले बार मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि शिक्षाविदों के सामने कहने का मौका मिल रहा है, इसलिए इस अवसर से मैं छूटना नहीं चाहता। आपसे निवेदन है कि जरा आपके महानियंत्रक पद को समाप्त करते हुए 2-4 मिनट देनी पड़ेगी। हमारे लिए सरकार और समयता की सीमाएं लगाने के लिए बहुत है, तो आप तो हमारी बात कहने वाले लोगों के थोड़ी बाधाएं पहुंचाती है, ये तकनीकी विशेषता है। आज का प्रमुख विषय 3 मुहावरों शब्दों को इंगित करता है। पहला है श्रमिक विधि और उनका प्रशासन, उसमें सुधार। दूसरा है श्रमिक अधिकार और तीसरा है ग्लोबलाइजेशन, वैश्वीकरण। मैं तीसरे से पहले आरंभ करता हूं। वैश्वीकरण की बातें इस समय विश्व में बहुत हो रही हैं, लेकिन पूरे विश्व के लोग इस बात से अनभिज्ञ हैं कि इस देश के वासी इस वैश्वीकरण की बात हजारों वर्षों से जबते आए हैं। सबसे पहले दुनिया में हमने कहा वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, ये बात सबसे पहले कहने वाले देशों में भारत देश ही था। लेकिन इसके पहले एक बात आती है, उस पर विचार करिए। मां इस मंत्र के पहले क्या आया? उदार चरित्राणाम वसुधैव कुटुंबकम। हमने कहा कि जिनका चरित्र उदार है उनके लिए वसुधा कुटुंब हो सकती है, लेकिन जिनकी ओछी वृत्ति है, जो केवल अपने स्वार्थ के लिए वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की बात कहना चाहते हैं, उनके लिए इस टर्म का कोई महत्व नहीं है, इस शब्द का कोई महत्व नहीं है। इसलिए मैं ये कहना चाहता हूं कि इस वैश्वीकरण के नाम पर अगर श्रमिक जगत का शोषण होता है तो हमें कतई स्वीकार नहीं है। ये सरमाएदार और सरकार दोनों की मिली भगत है कि इस नाम से श्रमिकों के ऊपर उत्पीड़न बढ़ाया जाए, जिससे उत्पादन में कोई बाधा नहीं हो। एक ही कारण वो बताते हैं कि श्रमिक उत्पादन में बाधा करता है, जबकि कोई भी रिसर्च, कोई भी यहाँ स्टूडेंट बैठे हैं सब जानते हैं, कहीं भी रिसर्च पेपर में कहीं भी पढ़ा होगा तो 2% से ज्यादा कहीं भी श्रमिकों का रोल उत्पादन में नहीं है। लेकिन फिर भी बात ये कही जाती है कि हमारे सबसे बड़ी बाधा श्रमिक बने हुए हैं। इस कारण उत्पादन के क्षेत्र में जो भी सीमा लगाई जानी है, इन पर लगाई जानी है, इससे छुटकारा नहीं मिलेगा तो हम इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं लाएंगे। सरकार के ऊपर वो दबाव डालते हैं कि यदि पूंजी हमसे लगवानी है तो यहां लेबर राइट्स को कट करना पड़ेगा, लेबर लॉज में रिफॉर्म करने पड़ेंगे। इसके लिए लेबर लॉ बने भी नहीं थे। लेबर लॉ बनने की आवश्यकता क्यों थी, इस विषय पर मैं बाद में आता हूं। लेकिन अगर वैश्वीकरण की बात कहने वाले लोग ये समझ लें कि श्रमिक भी उत्पादन में एक भागीदार है, उसके बिना उनके उत्पादन का काम नहीं चल सकता। यदि उसकी बातों पर ध्यान नहीं दिया तो कितने ही वैश्वीकरण की बातें कर लें, कंपटीशन की बात कर ले, कॉस्ट की बात कर ले, क्वालिटी की बात कर ले, वो उत्पादन में कभी अच्छी स्थिति प्राप्त नहीं कर सकते। इसलिए केवल एक ही परिवर्तन लाने की आवश्यकता है। परिवर्तन की बात कह रहे थे मेरे पूर्व वक्ता, अगर उनकी वृत्ति में परिवर्तन आता है, वो वृत्ति क्या है उनकी? वो वृत्ति ये बदलनी पड़ेगी, श्रमिक को स्लेव नहीं, श्रमिक को सेवक नहीं, श्रमिक को भागीदार समझना पड़ेगा। आज उनकी वृत्ति क्या है कि ये तो हमारा नौकर है, और नौकर को पीट पीट कर काम लेना है। जैसे मिडाइवल युग में काम लिया जाता था, वैसे काम लेने की आदत हमारी जब तक नहीं होगी तब तक हम श्रमिकों से उत्पादन नहीं करवा सकते। भावनाएं बिल्कुल गलत है। इसलिए केवल एक वृत्ति में परिवर्तन करने की आवश्यकता है कि श्रमिक को भागीदार बनाया जाए। वैश्वीकरण की बात होती है, हम कहते हैं कि आप क्वालिटी, कंपटीशन, कॉस्ट की बात करते हैं, तो आप श्रमिक सुविधाओं की बात क्यों नहीं करते? अमेरिका में कितना पैसा मिलता है, कितनी सुविधाएं मिलती है, यूरोप में कितना पैसा मिलता है, कितनी सुविधाएं मिलती है। हमारे ये सरमायादार, हमारे निवेशक, हमारे नियोजक चीन की, जापान की, अमेरिका की, यूरोप की बात करते हैं, लेकिन जब हम कहने को आते हैं कि वहां जितना पैसा मिलता है उतना दे दीजिए, हमारी समस्या है तो अपने आप ही दूर हो जाएगा, आपसे कुछ मांगने वाले उस बात को सुनने को तैयार नहीं। इसलिए एक हाथ से ताली बजने वाली नहीं, दोनों हाथों से ताली बजेगी, दोनों को मिलकर चलना होगा, आपसी भागीदारी बनानी होगी, तब ये काम बनेगा। हम ये जानते हैं कि उत्पादन के लिए पूंजी और श्रम दोनों आवश्यक है, और श्रम की महत्ता इस देश में बहुत पुराना, डिग्निटी ऑफ लेबर यहां बहुत पुराने जमाने से रखी जाती थी। हमारे यहां आपने देखा होगा कि डिग्निटी ऑफ लेबर कितनी थी कि श्रमिक और नियोजक में पिता पुत्र का संबंध था। इसमें वेस्टर्न कंसेप्ट आया, 21 में बदल गया, बॉसेस एंड सबऑर्डिनेटीज में हम मालिक हैं, वो गुलाम है। इसके कारण ये सबसे बड़ी दुविधा आ रही है। इसलिए इस बात पर भी विचार करना होगा कि इसको भागीदार बनाया जाए। आप देखते हैं न्यूज को ने जो पूंजी लगा रखी है वो तनख्वाह भी लेते हैं, उनके मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर हैं, उनके डायरेक्टर हैं, उनके मैनेजर्स हैं, और वो अंशदान भी लेते हैं। जब बराबर कैपिटल और श्रम में भागीदारी है तो श्रमिकों को भागीदारी क्यों नहीं दी जाती? उस लाभ में से उनको भी भागीदारी दो, तो ये अपने आप समस्या आने वाली नहीं है। लेकिन इस बारे में कोई सोचते नहीं। केवल वैश्वीकरण की बात कह के सरकार को, अन्य समाज के लोगों को, शिक्षा बंधुओं को, सबको उल्लू बनाना कि श्रमिक केवल नारे लगाने वाला उत्पादन नहीं करता है, बदमाश है, हमारे उत्पादन में बाधा करता है, इस व्यक्ति से ये परिवर्तन उनमें लाना होगा। दूसरी बात आई हमारे श्रम नीतियों की। हम सभी जानते हैं कि उत्पादन के क्षेत्र में 19वीं सदी के अंत में महत्वपूर्ण परिवर्तन आए। पहले उत्पादन स्वयं श्रमिक अपने घर करता था, वह खुद करता था, अपना सामान लगाता था, अपनी मशीन काम में लेता था, अपने टूल्स काम में लेता था, और उस उत्पादन को स्वयं ही बेचता था, न उसको मार्केटिंग की आवश्यकता थी। लेकिन मशीनों के अवतरण के कारण, मशीनों के आविष्कार के कारण फैक्ट्रियां बनने लगी, मालिक टूल्स देने लगा, स्थान देने लगा, और वहां काम करने लगा। सारे ग्रामीण दस्तकार शहरों में जाके इकट्ठे हो गए, उनको कम वेतन पे काम करना पड़ा, उनके एक्सीडेंट होने लगे, उनको कंपनसेशन के लिए लड़ाई लड़नी पड़ी। अमेरिका में बहुत बड़ा आंदोलन जो ग्रामीण दस्तकार थे, नाई थे, उनका हुआ, जिनके कारण हम आज भी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय श्रम दिवस मनाते हैं। 159 लोग उसमें मारे गए। काम के घंटे कब कम हुए? जब 159 लोग वहां मारे गए। इस कारण काम के घंटे कम हुए। तो श्रमिक विधि की आवश्यकता क्यों पड़ी? मैं कानून का विद्यार्थी हूं, इसलिए मैं जानता हूं कानून की आवश्यकता किसको पड़ती है, पीड़ित को। लेकिन यह कानून किसको संरक्षण देगा? जो स्वयंभू है, सर्वशक्तिमान है, जिसके पास शक्तियां, उनका कानून उनसे संरक्षण चाहते हैं। ऐसा कभी दुनिया में संभव नहीं हो सकता। इसलिए इनमें लेबर रिफॉर्म्स की बात करने की बात ही कहां आती है? हम भारतीय मजदूर संघ की ओर से सदैव ये कहते हैं कि हमें लेबर रिफॉर्म्स नहीं चाहिए। आधुनिक परिस्थिति में जिनको कानून की आवश्यकता है, श्रमिकों को कानून की आवश्यकता है, उन श्रमिकों के पक्ष में इनका रिव्यू करना है तो आप रिव्यू करिए, लेकिन ये रिफॉर्म की बात कहां से आ गई? अभी मेरे पूर्व में माननीय अब्राहम जी सुबह कह रहे थे कि राजस्थान सरकार ने कुछ परिवर्तन किए, जिनकी प्रशंसा केंद्र सरकार ने की है, अन्य लोगों ने की है। मैं बताना चाहता हूं, वहां फैक्ट्री एक्ट में एक संशोधन लाया गया है। उस संशोधन ने क्या किया कि वो फैक्ट्री एक्ट उन कारखानों पे लागू नहीं होगा जहां 10 की जगह 20 श्रमिक पावर से काम करते हैं, और 20 की जगह जहां पावर से बिना पावर के काम करने वाले 40 श्रमिक होंगे। राजस्थान में हमने एक आंकड़ा लिया, उस आंकड़े के अनुसार 13,500 कारखाने थे, उनमें से केवल 256 कारखाने उस कानून के तहत रह गए, बाकी 13,000 निकल गए। यानी कवरेज से दूर करना। हमारी 3 मांगे इसमें, कानून में परिवर्तन, जैसे प्रोफेसर देवनाथन जी कह रहे थे, सारा श्रमिक समान है, वो कैसे भी अपॉइंट किया गया है, वो कैजुअल है, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट का लेबर है, आकस्मिक लेबर है, वो मैंने कह दिया, कॉन्ट्रैक्टर का लेबर है, अस्थायी है, एक सा काम करता है, इसलिए उन पर एक से कानून, एक सा वेवेज, ये सब बातें मिलनी चाहिए। इस बात को कौन इंश्योर करेगा? आज तक कोई भी कानून की अनुपालना भली प्रकार नहीं हुई। ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में हम सुनते थे, कहानियां सुनते थे कि हमने घर बनाया, घर बना के उसमें रहने लगे, रहने के बाद जब कुछ सुविधा की बात करने लगे तो ये कह दिया गया कि अभी सुविधाएं देने में कठिनाई है, जरा बाद में देंगे। लेकिन जब सुविधा देने लायक हुए तब ये कह दिया कि घर को भी उजाड़ते, हम तो फोड़ते इसको, आप जाओ कहीं। ये बात कभी चलने वाली नहीं। इसलिए ये बात कोई भी श्रमिक जगत का आदमी तो मानने वाला नहीं है कि लेबर रिफॉर्म श्रमिक के विपक्ष में किए जाए। आज भी आवश्यकता है कि जैसे पूर्व वक्ताओं ने कहा अभी कि 90% लोग ऐसे हैं जिनको मिनिमम वेजेज नहीं मिलता। असंगठित क्षेत्र में उनको कम से कम मिनिमम वेजेज नहीं मिले जब तक उस कानून में रिफॉर्म कैसे किया जा सकता है? या कोई श्योरिटी। हम तो ये चाहते हैं कि प्रत्येक श्रमिक, चाहे वो अकेला काम करता है, किसी दुकान पर काम करता है, किसी एस्टेब्लिशमेंट के काम करता है, सड़क पे काम करता है, खुद का काम करता है, सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयड है, लेकिन मजदूरी करता है, उसको भी सोशल सिक्योरिटी मिलनी चाहिए। सोशल सिक्योरिटी आज तक नहीं है। उधर बढ़ा रहे, कवरेज बढ़ा रहे। आप देखिए कि ऑटोमेशन बढ़ रहा है, उत्पादन के साधनों में कंप्यूटर आ गया, ऑटोमेटिक मशीनें आ गई, फैक्ट्रियों में श्रमिकों की संख्या कम हो रही है, या उनको कवरेज से बाहर निकालें, उनकी संख्या बढ़ा रहे हैं कि उनको कवरेज से बाहर निकालो, उल्टा काम कर रहे हैं। उनकी संख्या बढ़ाने की जगह कि ये कवरेज उन कारखानों पे लागू होगा जिनमें इतने श्रमिक, बड़े हुए श्रमिक काम करेंगे। जिस आवश्यकता को लेकर कानून बना था वो आवश्यकता आज भी विद्यमान है, लेकिन उन आवश्यकता को बिना ध्यान में दिए कानूनों में संशोधन की बात करते हैं। बात कहीं चलने वाली नहीं। तीसरी बात जो लास्ट में है वो इसमें लेबर राइट्स की बात है। श्रमिकों के अधिकार क्या, उसके पास क्या, उसके पास एक शक्ति है। इस दुनिया में हमने सुना 3 शक्तियां होती हैं, 3 एम से उनको डिनोट कर सकते हैं, माइंड, मसल एंड मनी। मनी ऐसी शक्ति है कि वो दोनों शक्तियों को परचेज कर सकती है, माइंड को भी परचेज कर लेती है और मसल को भी परचेज कर लेती है। चौथी शक्ति की बात पुराने जमाने में कही कि संघो शक्ति करोगी, इस युग में संगठन की भी शक्ति होगी, लेकिन उन संगठन की शक्ति को भी इन्होंने परचेज करना शुरू कर दिया। यानी चौथी शक्ति भी खरीदी जा सकती है। ये हमें आज परिलक्षित हो रहा है। इस कारण सबसे ज्यादा संकट यह आ गया कि जो मनी पावर है वो खुद संरक्षित है और सरकार उसको संरक्षित करना चाहती है। सरमाएदार संरक्षित है लेकिन सरकार और मिल गई और तीसरा पक्ष और मिल गया। हमारी न्यायपालिका भी कुछ उनको समर्थन देने लग गई। हमने शिक्षा उद्योग आज बुलाया, एक चौथा पार्टनर हमारे यहाँ जोड़ा, 5वां भी जोड़ी, न्यायपालिका के लोगों को बुलाइए, उनसे भी सुनिए कि क्या कहते हैं और इनकी क्या आवश्यकता है और किनके बारे में क्या करना है। आज हमें न्यायालय में सुनना पड़ता है श्रमिक तो नारे लगाता काम ही नहीं करता। सारे विश्व में श्रमिक जगत को बदनाम कर रखा है। श्रमिक जगत भी काम में इसलिए ले रहा हूं कि इसमें एक इंट्रोडक्टरी नोट में फिर आ गया। डॉक्टर सिन्हा जी जानते, कई गोष्ठियों में हमने कहा है कि ये श्रमिक कोई कमोडिटी नहीं है। प्रोफेसर देवनाथन जी भी कह रहे थे, अन्य लोगों ने भी कहा श्रमिक कोई बेचने वाली चीज नहीं है। ये हमारी मानवीय संवेदना को पर प्रहार करने वाली बात है। इसलिए इस शब्द की जगह श्रमिक जगत काम में ले लीजिए, श्रमिक क्षेत्र काम में ले लीजिए। देवनाथ जी ने कहा श्रमिक सेना काम में ले लीजिए, ये सब मंजूर है, लेकिन कम से कम हमें कमोडिटी तो मत बताइए कि हमको बिकने वाली चीज है, बाजार में जाकर एक वस्तु की तरह बिकने वाली चीज है ये। तो ये शब्द काम में नहीं है। विश्व स्तर पर भी हमने कहा कि ये लेबर मार्केट कहां से ढूंढ रहा है, ये कौन सी इकोनॉमिक्स आ गई, कौन सा सिद्धांत है, कहां से सब ढूंढ के लाए हो कि श्रमिक एक कमोडिटी हो सकता है। इसलिए मैं तो ये कह रहा हूं कि लेबर राइट्स उसका संरक्षण कर रहे। एक ही तो पावर था बेचारे के पास, वो क्या था, कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग, सामूहिक सौदेबाजी। और सामूहिक सौदेबाजी के अधिकार क्या थे, आंदोलन करना, स्ट्राइक करना, दोनों पे। एक पे सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने पाबंदी लगा रखी कि हड़ताल करना तो पाप है। अभी राजस्थान में हड़ताल हुई, वकीलों की बहुत सक्षम हड़ताल थी, 100% हड़ताल थी, लेकिन उसमें भी उनको कोई सफलता नहीं है। इसलिए वो बार्गेनिंग शक्ति कम हो रही है। तो लेबर राइट्स का प्रोटेक्शन कैसे होगा, प्रोटेक्शन लेबर राइट्स का कैसे हो सकता है जब तक सरकार का संरक्षण नहीं मिले। सरकार संरक्षण किसके द्वारा दे सकती है, कानून के द्वारा दे सकती है। उस कानून में रिफॉर्म हो जाएगा तो हमारे राइट्स का प्रोटेक्ट होंगे। इसलिए हमारे राइट्स पर ध्यान देने की आवश्यकता है। उन राइट्स के प्रति हम बड़े सजग हैं। राजस्थान सरकार ने जो परिवर्तन किए उनके खिलाफ बहुत बड़े बड़े प्रदर्शन हुए। हालांकि आज तक उन परिवर्तनों पर राष्ट्रपति की मोहर नहीं लगी। हम सरकार से निवेदन करना चाहते हैं कि केवल पूंजी निवेश को बढ़ावा देने के लिए श्रमिकों के पर काटने की बात आई तो ये श्रमिक जगत कहीं भी उत्पादन में सहयोग करने वाला नहीं है। स्पष्ट शब्दों में ये चेतावनी हम इस मंच से देना चाहते हैं। कोई भी सरकार है। अगर सरकार और सरमाएदार और अन्य ने मिलकर कोई श्रमिकों के साथ साजिश रची तो वो 50% भागीदार है। वो 50% भागीदार अपनी शक्ति का संचयन करेगा और उस शक्ति का उपयोग करना वो जानता है। इसलिए निवेदन ये है कि ये तीनों सब्जेक्ट्स पर जो बात चल रही है इस पर चर्चा नहीं कर केवल श्रमिक की सामाजिक सुरक्षा, समान वेतन, समान कार्य का समान वेतन, सबको समान सुविधाएं, ये बात हमारे माध्यम से सब मंचों पर पहुंचाई जानी चाहिए। आपने बड़े धैर्य से सुना, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद शर्मा जी। Okay, we move further and may I invite Rampriya. She is advocate in Madras High Court, but then she has other linkage also. She is ILO consultant as well, active in the area of labor jurisprudence. Mr. Rampriya. She has PowerPoint.
So am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Good afternoon everybody. I will make a short presentation.
Not on that side.
Yeah. So I'll be making a short presentation on the state of labor rights in the country and the labor reforms. The first part of the presentation will be on the state of labour rights in the country. So as you all know, in 1991, there was a major shift in India's economic policy, and it was believed that the adoption of the policies of liberalization, globalization and privatization would lead to that economic growth. And once this policy was adopted in the sector, then even the various states in India, they geared their industrial policies and economic policies with the same objectives of liberalization, globalization and privatization. And once these policies were adopted in the country, there were major changes in the employment pattern in the country. As Professor Praveen had already pointed out, even in the formal sector, there was rapid informalization of the formal sector. So permanent employment gradually came to be reduced. And this was both on account of privatization and on account of schemes like the voluntary retirement scheme, which was actually a compulsory retirement scheme to shut out people from permanent employment. And there was reduced recruitment and permanent vacancies. And instead, there was increasing engagement of various categories of vulnerable employees or precarious workers. These include casual labor, contract labor, and various categories of non-regular workers, termed like apprentices, probationers, and so on. And there are glaring disparities between the wages of the permanent workers and these categories of non-regular workers, even when they perform the same or similar kind of work. And the wage disparities are huge. And alongside, overtime work also became a regular feature. And overtime, I mention it as regular overtime work because it happens almost every week. And in factories that I have studied, overtime work is, workers sometimes even have to work for 2 shifts at a stretch. So it becomes 8 plus 8, 16. And 10 hours is very normal. So as it is, the Factories Act norms relating to the 8-hour working day, they're being drastically violated. And if you look at the standing orders of many companies, refusing to work overtime is a misconduct. So even permanent workers, they don't have a choice in the matter of working overtime because refusal to work overtime may be a misconduct. And in the case of various categories of precarious workers, they have virtually no choice. Because if they say they will not act as per the instructions of the employer, they'll be thrown out the very next day because they have no security of employment. So this is the state, of labor in the country today. There is increasing informalization, and the 8-hour working day norm is not respected at all in the manufacturing sector. Now, at a time like this, when labor rights were increasingly under attack following the adoption of the new economic policy, one would have expected the judiciary to be sympathetic to workers' causes because the judiciary had zealously protected workers' rights in the earlier decades, in the 60s, especially since the 80s, 70s and 80s when PIL was, the innovation of PIL took place, and when the Supreme Court interpreted labor enactments very broadly, so as to extend the coverage of labor enactments to give maximum protection to the maximum number of workers. So the workers and unions really looked up to the judiciary to protect their rights. But what happened? What happened in the post-liberalization era? The reforms that could not be achieved through the legislature because in the parliament they did not have the numbers, so they couldn't push through the reforms pursuant to the Second Labour Commission report and so on. These reforms were achieved through the judiciary to a certain degree. So some of the significant rulings, such as put it up from the board, there was the same case related to contract labour where the Supreme Court held that contract labour would not be entitled to permanent absorption following the issue of an abolition notification under the Contract Labour Act. And the Umadeli case related to casual workers where the Supreme Court held that casual or temporary workers would have no entitlement to permanency irrespective of the length of their service. Even if they had worked for 20 to 25 years, they would not be entitled to permanency. Even if they were doing work of a permanent nature, they would not be entitled to permanency if their entry was a backdoor entry. That is, if they were not recruited through the employment exchange in accordance with the prescribed procedures, they will have no entitlement to permanency. Then there was a Balco case related to privatization where the Supreme Court held that it is not obligatory for the employer to consult with the workers or with the trade unions concerned before implementation of a policy of disinvestment. And they also held that such decisions are policy decisions which cannot be challenged by way of a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court, and if at all they can be challenged, it can be only on the ground of violation of a statutory norm or if the decisions are proven to be malafide. Otherwise, they cannot be challenged in the court. And the T.K. Rangarajan case, which the speaker just before me had referred to, where the court held that government employees have no legal, fundamental, moral, or equitable right to strike. But the ramifications of the case go beyond government employees because the court made pronunciations on the right to strike as such. They held that strike itself is a weapon which creates chaos and maladministration. So this case has wider ramifications beyond government employees. Then there were cases relating to wage parity for contract workers on par with permanent workers when they do the same or similar kind of work. But the Supreme Court again, it narrowed the scope. Though the rules framed under the Contract Labour Act say that workers should be paid the same wages when they perform the same or similar kind of work, the Supreme Court said no, we have to look at the degree of skill of the worker, then we have to look at the responsibilities they are vested with. As a result of which, it becomes very difficult for contract workers to actually in practice claim wages on par with permanent workers. Then there are also various cases of unlawfully dismissed workers, even if they are dismissed in violation of Section 25N of the Industrial Disputes Act. Contrary to the earlier precedent, the Supreme Court held that they will not be entitled to reinstatement and they will not be entitled to full back wages. So if you look at all these cases, what has the Supreme Court really, what it has done is it has undermined labour rights and diluted labour rights, because contract workers virtually no case except when the contract is proven to be sham or nominal, they cannot claim permanency. So which means the contract worker will remain a contract worker forever. And again, he or she will not have wage parity because of other rulings of the Supreme Court, which all issue of wage parity. So a contract worker is virtually condemned by virtue of these decisions of the Supreme Court, and similarly casual workers. The government may very conveniently engage casual workers, but no action, no accountability on the part of the government which hired these casual workers, but virtually they'll never be entitled to permanency. So in these ways, not only the vulnerable workers made more vulnerable by virtue of this shift in jurisprudence to the Supreme Court, but also collective rights have been diluted. For instance, if you look at the T.K. Rangarajan case, right to strike, which is an essential element of the freedom of association, that has been weakened by the Supreme Court. Then the Balfour case, I mean, we were talking about tripartism earlier today, and virtually this whole principle is nullified when they say workers will have no right to be heard or consulted prior to the implementation of a decision related to disinvestment. So both collective rights and individual rights, as in the case of unlawfully dismissed workers and so on, both collective rights and individual rights have been weakened by the decisions of the Supreme Court in the post-liberalization era. So the implications of the shift in jurisprudence obviously are there's a greater flexibility for employers because they now have greater flexibility in the matter of hiring contract workers and casual or temporary workers because they know no consequences will follow. They do not have to pay them the same wages and they do not have to regularize them at any point of time. And already I also touched upon the issue of overtime earlier. They have a lot of flexibility, employers, because the laws, it's not just that the Supreme Court has weakened the laws, but also the enforcement of laws has been very poor in the post-liberalization era. So, what has happened post-1991 is employers already have a great deal of flexibility in practice. Now the question is whether they need to have greater flexibility under the law, but before I come to that, I'll just touch upon what are the trade union demands for strengthening labour rights. So alongside all these developments, trade unions began to repeatedly emphasize that labour rights need to be strengthened because labour rights are greatly under attack. So some of the major demands of the trade unions are, one is they're seeking an amendment to the Contract Labour Act. Now this issue of wage parity, that finds place only under the rules framed under the Contract Labour Act, both in the central rules and the rules of the various states. But the unions have been demanding that this be made a provision under the Act, so that when contract workers perform the same or similar kind of work as the permanent workers, they should get the same wages. They're saying that this should be a provision of the Act. And they also say that there should be a provision for permanent absorption of contract workers consequent upon the issue with abolition notification. That's another major demand. Then they are demanding the amendment of the Trade Unions Act so that registration take place within a period of 30 days. Because now the practical reality is registration can take forever or it's may not happen at all unless you seek the intervention of the court or somebody like the ILO Committee on Freedom of Association. Registration of a union is very difficult. So amendment to the Trade Unions Act is also being sought. The recognition of trade unions, there's a vacuum in that area. There is no law obliging the employer to give recognition to a trade union, even if it happens to represent the majority of the workers in an enterprise. So they're seeking the enactment of a law on recognition of trade unions. And then the Industrial Disputes Act, amendments are being sought to make the protection against anti-union discrimination and interference stronger, and also to improve access to justice. So there is a section, which is section 10 of the Act, as per which for taking any dispute to the court, a reference from the government is necessary, and in practice the reference power is abused to shut out a lot of disputes, or the disputes are only partially referred for adjudication. For example, if a union places a chart of demands with 10 demands, usually only 1 or 2 demands get referred and 8 are not referred. So there's also a call for improvement access to justice under the Industrial Disputes Act. And then unions are of course demanding enforcement of the laws. So the laws may look quite good on paper, but there's no point in them enforced. And then another major demand is of course ratification of the 4 remaining core conventions which India has not ratified, the 2 conventions relating to freedom of association and collective bargaining, and 2 relating to child labor. So in this scenario, instead of considering the present state of labor rights and the problems that the labor in India are facing and the trade union demands, all of these have been ignored, and looking only at the industry, the interests of the industry and the demands of the industry, amendments are being proposed to the Factories Act, Apprentices Act, and the labour laws exemption from furnishing returns and maintaining registers by certain establishments. Now, the amendments have been somewhat sugar-coated, I should say, to make it appear that there is something in it for workers as well. For example, for earned leave, under the Factories Act now they say the requirement instead of 240 days, if a worker puts in 90 days, because they'll get earned leave. Then there is some improvements in relation to occupational health and safety. This is to make it appear that no, these reforms are not just pro-employer reform, there is something in it for workers as well. But we need to lift the weight, or we need to look deeper. And if we do that, we'll see that these reforms have been initiated for the purpose of industry. And Factories Act, one of the major reforms that is proposed now is to enhance the number of permissible hours of overtime work for 50 to 100 hours under Section 64 of the Factories Act. And in special cases, which is under Section 65 of the Factories Act, the number of hours of overtime, permissible hours of overtime work is proposed to be increased from 75 hours in a quarter to 125 hours in a quarter. Then another amendment proposed is to increase the scope of engagement of women workers in night work. I mean, although as it is, women workers are being engaged in night work, but now they want to give employers greater flexibility in that regard. Of course, they say there should be safeguards, like there should be proper transport facilities and so on. But these amendments will, and they also, there's a provision saying that, the proposed reforms, if you take a look, they say that we should consult, employers should consult women workers before engaging them in night work, but that is unlikely to happen. This provision is likely to just push more women into night work against their will. So, and then the Apprentices Act, there's going to be greater flexibility to employers to engage apprentices from other states, then flexibility in the number of apprentices to be engaged, because right now the ratio is fixed by the government, and the number of trades in which they may be engaged. Now, instead of waiting for a notification in the official gazette, the employers can start engaging them in whichever trade and then get it. It's like a gratification post the action. Then the penalty of imprisonment, that is proposed to be removed. And then restrictions on inspection. No inspection can be done without the permission of the Central Apprentice Advisor or the State Apprentice Advisor as the case. So these are the kinds of amendments, and you can clearly see that the intent is to increase flexibility for employers. Now, apart from the reforms proposed by the central government, reforms have already been undertaken also by a few states. For example, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. In Rajasthan, under the Factories Act, the threshold of limits have been increased, which means fewer factories will come into the coverage of the Act, because the requirement has been increased to 20 in the case of factories working with the aid of power and 40 in the case of factories without the aid of power. In the case of the Industrial Disputes Act, for the application of Chapter 5B of the Act, which requires prior governmental permission to effect layoff, retrenchment or closure. The requirement has been enhanced to 300 instead of 100 workers. And Contract Labour Act, the Act will apply only if the factory has a minimum of 50 workers and has engaged a minimum of 50 contract workers in the previous year in the place of 20. And Madhya Pradesh also similar amendments have been proposed. And one additional amendment that I wanted to touch upon, which I read about, was that the Standing Orders Act is also going to be amended there, whereby in the case of small and medium enterprises employing up to 50 workers, any worker may be terminated anytime without the need to give any reasons or hold any inquiry. So even for permanent workers, the security is gone. It's not just the case of contract workers or temporary workers. And Rajasthan is now looked upon as a torchbearer by the government, something which other states need to emulate. So the objective of all these reforms, as I've been repeating, is it's evident that it is to facilitate more easy hire and fire and give greater flexibility to employers. And workers' interests have been completely overlooked in the process. And the last question I asked was, do we need such reforms? Obviously, the answer is an emphatic no. We do not need such reforms. We do need legal reforms, but we need reforms to plug the loopholes in our law, to plug the shortcomings in our law. It's a myth that Indian laws are too rigid and that employers don't have flexibility under the law. They already have sufficient flexibility under the law, and in practice, the flexibility they have is immense because they don't respect the law, and also the enforcement authorities look the other way. They are also not enforcing the law strictly. So employers already have sufficient flexibility under the law, and there is no need for greater flexibility. The kind of reforms we need is reforms which the trade unions have been demanding, and reforms to strengthen it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Palangashan. Okay, can I invite now Christine Nathan from our Asia Pacific representative for workers' specialist at ILO Conference, and she is also from the Trade Union Advisory. I hope Christine also has a trade union background, but she has done extensive work in the area of labor rights in the whole of Asia Pacific. Ms. Christina.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished panelists and colleagues, students of XLRI. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Christine Nathan. I have worked with the trade unions and later joined the ILO office based in the regional office in Bangkok, Thailand, as a regional specialist for workers' education, dealing mostly with issues related to the informal economy, child labor, women's issues, industrial relations, labor rights, ratification, skills, migration, worked closely with the ADB and the ASEAN, and dealing mostly with concerns related to workers and trade unions. This also took me to attend and participate in tripartite meetings with workers, employers, and governments, debating the issues related to the world of work. Most of the time, the employers will be accompanied by their HR directors, which we can see that these schools are producing, who will always advise the employers as they serve the link between the trade unions, the workers, and the management of the companies. At this point, I would not like to go into the details discussed earlier by my colleagues, but I would like to share some experiences as working in the region and in this, especially with looking at working with the HR directors. 2 months ago, the ILO ACTRA, which is the Bureau for Workers' Activities, organized a national workshop in New Delhi to discuss the labor law reforms, the role of workers, the trade unions in these reforms, especially in the light of the recent reforms in India, as Ramapriya just mentioned. Following this seminar and the experience in the ILO and the interactions with HR directors at various stages, we had a discussion as how to bring these issues of the ILO, its meaning, its tripartite role in the world of work within these institutions. And today we are having this seminar in XLRI where we are having interactions with the ILO, the trade unions and the XLRI. Raghavan has also mentioned about the structure, the foundations and the role and relevance of the ILO. Secondly, in recent months, I also had the opportunity to visit a few law universities in a few states in India and to see how much information they have on the role of the ILO, its tripartite structure, the role of the workers, employers and governments, and the relevance of the workers and trade unions in the enterprise, factories and industry. And this was also lacking. As much as it is lacking in the business schools, it's also lacking in the law universities. And I don't know, Brahmapriya mentioned, one of the things ILO also does is training of lawyers and judges on how to bring about the ILO's mandate in their debates. Dave Nathan and Raghavan said this morning, labor is not a commodity and should be treated, and they should be treated as human beings and partners in production. The truth is far from this. They are seen and promoted by the media as corrupt, criminals, ignorant, unskilled. Recently in Bangladesh, we saw that there is 4.5 million workers in the garment factory, and the way they are described is poor, unskilled, and illiterate, but they are the workers who are producing for a $20 billion industry. How do you tell these workers as poor, illiterate, and unskilled? Also, in Hyderabad, a multinational company had to close down its factory with 800 workers because the only crime that their workers committed was to initiate a trade union. It was closed down in 48 hours and 800 workers were sacked. Today, the trade unions are not only criticized and demoralized, but the individual workers too, as workers are seen as tools of production and more production and more production, and as they are tools to increase productivity under any circumstances. Now, this is not only the case in India, but the same while I was working in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and Nepal. In Bangladesh, the garment workers, for example, to get the wage of $2 a day, have to work for 18 hours under very, very difficult circumstances, with the management forcing new methods of work, long hours of work, and a very high rate of accidents. Very often the garment woman worker removes the needle guard, machine guard, which is the needles from the machine guard from the sewing machine, in order to meet the target of 200 or 300 shirts a day. And hence the accidents are so rampant that the needle breaks because the guard is removed. She has to meet the target. The needle goes through her finger, runs through the bloodstream, and pierces her heart and her lungs. And these reports go unrecorded. If occupation safety and health is an issue, because you have 2.3 million globally workers having accidents, only 60% of this 2.3 million is reported, and 60% of those accidents are in India. Secondly, we also have very high level of dismantling formal sector, getting into the EPZs and getting into the SEZs. It's increasing in India, SEZs is increasing in Dubai, in Jordan, in Sri Lanka, etc. Today, the world of work is looking at new forms of contract labor. They're dismantling the formal sector and creating supply chains, increasing informalization, promotion of informal sector. Praveen Jha also mentioned the ills associated with this growing informality. Outsourcing is another area of work which is bothersome and worrisome to the trade unions. For example, when we were discussing with Philippines and Indonesia, the Philippines, in their tripartite committee, have decided that jobs will only be outsourced if those skills are not available in the Philippines. Not all jobs will be getting outsourced. Another area I observed while traveling in Vietnam while auditing some of their factories, in the auto sector, in the garment sector, in the leather sector, the investors, when you enter these factories, you will know exactly which country is investing. For example, entering a factory where the investor is from Thailand, Korea, or Taiwan, the working conditions and the workplace are horrendous, appalling working conditions. Because these are the countries which don't have trade unions. These are the countries coming with that kind of culture which also has lack of rights in their own countries. So they will not respect the workers in another country. If you enter the factory which the investors are Europeans, Australians, or New Zealand, you can see the factory's working conditions is a bit better because these countries have strong trade unions and the HR directors and the management are trained to respect workers' working rights and hence they have better workplace ambience or workplace atmosphere. If you look at investors coming from Japan and Singapore, the workplace safety is highly commendable because OSH is a priority in these countries. So these investors who come from these countries to Vietnam or Cambodia or Philippines, you can know exactly what's the culture in those countries the investors are coming from. The students of Ahmedabad Business Schools or XLRI will be HR directors and multinationals placed in Singapore, Thailand. And you will carry the culture training of your country and your institution when you go as HR directors overseas. This morning we saw the video that the institute started. This institute was started with trade union training on collective bargaining, training on wage negotiations, training on rights, etc. And I was hoping to see these subjects in the present curriculum too. Maybe it's there, but we would like to see the importance is given in this area of training for the students as well. To understand this issue and views of the other side, the Institute of B Schools should see the importance and relevance of the workers who should be seen as partners in development, and the institution of trade unions should be understood and respected first if we do not want money served to occur again and again. Recently, the ILO and Ministry of Rural Development wanted to do a mapping of NREGA in one state in India, and I was asked to do so. I was appalled to see in my travels of 2 weeks the working and living conditions of the rural workers, and the infrastructure they create is equally poor. I mean, the conditions are poor of the workers, the livelihood is poor, and even the infrastructure they produce is so poor. In the absence of job creation and employment policy in the country, NREGA has become an answer for job creation. On one hand, the formal sector is dismantling and workers are working without contract and any formal forms of employment. And on the other hand, we have NREGA to arrest migration. So urban poor and rural poor are increasing, hence poverty is getting a bigger and bigger issue. I know soon the placement agencies will be visiting the campuses here, and we will see in the newspapers the business schools are now getting placement agencies are paying 15 lakhs, 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs to students as their salaries. That's fine, we're not against it. But no one speaks of the 94% who are earning $2 a day in this country. In this country, there are many B schools, IIMs, but no establishment of training centers or institutes where workers can be trained in the roles and responsibilities and rights at the workplace. Hence, it's a lopsided society where the worker earns $2, stands up to an HR director trained in Wharton or trained in XLRI or trained in Ahmedabad. There's no capacity for a worker at that level debating and talking to the HR directors who are highly professional and highly paid in their enterprise. So it's really something we have to be worried about and care about. So the future HR chiefs of tomorrow who are present here, you can also assist in understanding the important role you play in the enterprise. You have to promote industrial relations and look at trade unions, employers to work together. So you are the HR chiefs when you are in Turkey, Cambodia, Philippines. They will see you as the HR director, trained in the Jesuit Institute XLRI, which, as they said this morning, is like no other business school in India, as you will carry the values you have to make the workplace a harmonious, peaceful, with full rights for workers with dignity. A lot of this rests on you. Wishing you all the best in your future as a model HR director. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nathan. Now we move to the last speaker, Professor K.R. Shyamsundar, the old professor. But that is a short introduction. His background at university in Bombay, where he did extensive work in the area of HR, IR, economics, is well commendable. We have brought out a number of books in this area, and of course we are colleagues at Indian Society of Labour Economics. Dr. Shyamsundar.
Thank you, Chairman, and my fellow panelists, dear students and colleagues at XLRI, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to ask a basic question. The labour flexibility reforms that are started to be introduced, are they legitimate? I'm going to use a little bit of data. So I'm also apologetic to the trade union leaders that I don't speak any language good, and you will see that my English is also equally bad. So I will permit me kindly to speak in English. Now the first thing that I want to get rid of is we come across the term labour reforms. Is it a correct term to use? Who are we trying to reform? The labour as an individual, or labour as a class? What are we trying to say by labour reforms? When capital market reforms take place, we don't say it is capital reforms. We say capital market reforms. And labour reforms usually refer to the employer's agenda. The flexibility, the hire and fire, the contract labour flexibility, the bonus ceiling to be removed. All these things are pro-employer agenda. So when we say labour reforms, we are partial. We don't talk about, this is the correct industrial relations language. When we talk about, when the talk about the informal sector workers being provided with social security, none of the business dailies talked about labour reforms. They talked about unorganized sector welfare reforms. So I want to do away with the term labour reforms. That's why when I was asked to, I'm being a facilitator, I worded it as labor law and governance reforms. So the term labour reforms is a baggage, with a baggage. Secondly, labour flexibility enjoys legitimacy. Labour flexibility is seen to be employment friendly. If you have labour flexibility, you will generate employment. If you have labour flexibility, you will attract capital. What is the opposite of labour flexibility? Labour rigidity. Labour flexibility is advocated by employers, and those who oppose labour flexibility are enemies of growth. This is another trap of semantics. So I am trying to find out how trade unions are getting trapped into this semantics of language. Trade unions are public goods or private goods. That will, because of positive I may leave it. Now, an interesting development is taking place at the global level. In the mid-1990s, till the 1990s, ILO was on one axis and World Bank was another axis. But since 2000s, ILO and World Bank are coming together. If ILO and World Bank would come together, employers and trade unions would also come together. This is the fundamental proposition. And when we talk about labour regulation debate, there are two aspects of it. One is core labour law reforms, that is hire and fire, contract labour, and apprenticeship, and etc. etc. Another one is governance reforms.
Let me talk first about governance reforms. Whenever we open the newspapers, business dailies, we get the term Inspector Raj. We have done away with the licensed Raj, so let us do away with the Inspector Raj. The term Inspector Raj is used in a pejorative manner, adversarial manner. Is Inspector Raj is there? Is there an animal called Inspector Raj? Where is enforcement? Labor laws cover only 7 to 8% of the workforce. 93% of the labor workforce are not covered by labor laws. Where is Inspector Raj? And there are certain privileged sectors like special economic zones, IT sector, IT enabled sector, malls, retail sector, biotech sector. These are export-oriented sectors, growth-oriented sectors. There absolutely labor enforcement is not there. And MSMEs are not, they are far too numerous to be covered by inspectorate. Self-certification scheme has been introduced. So the point that I am making is that enforcement coverage is so limited, it is really futile to call it as Inspector Raj. As I told you, the labor law covers not more than 5% of the workers with the minimum wage law. The number of inspectors per 1,000 workers, the ratio of labor inspectors to the workers' population, is slowly declining over the years. It is inadequate. According to the ILO, in the less developed countries, the inspector workforce ratio should be, for every 40,000 workers, there will be one inspector. But a rough estimate made by me is, for every 1.25 lakh workers, there is one inspector. What are we talking about, Inspector Raj? And Ministry of Labour has been completely marginalized in various ways. Who forms, labour policy? It's no longer formed by the Ministry of Labour. It is formed by the Industries Department. And the enforcement inspector reform that Ramapri spoke about came from Department of Industrial Promotion and Policy, DIPP. It is again connected with Ministry of Commerce. So, Ministry of Labour doesn't exist anymore. ILO should take a serious note of this, the marginalization of the ministry. And the factories that are inspected, there is no national inspection data. Whatever data that I could get, there is no PowerPoint going on. Can I request? I'm really sorry. Okay, the proportion of factories that are proportionate of factories, registered factories that are covered by inspection, if you see they are showing declining trend. And the number of total visits, the entire labor department of Maharashtra, this is only of one state, but it is typical of it's a typical story for all the states in India. The inspection visits, if you see, there is a steep decline over the years. The average rate of prosecution of employers has come down very greatly. The number of irregularities detected by the inspectors also has shown decrease. It means two things. Either employers are becoming angels or inspectors are becoming inefficient. You can decide whichever is the appropriate one. Now it takes 3 years in Maharashtra for the minimum wage inspectors to visit once the establishment. What are we talking about, Inspector Raj? And what is happening in the post-reform period to the industrial relations system? It's like a seesaw battle. On the one hand, the employers are clamoring for labor flexibility. On the other hand, the trade unions are asking for high amount of labor regulation. As a result, two things are happening. Number one, there is excessive labor flexibility by the employers. Number two, there is tremendous amount of militancy, aggressive tactics. And what's industrial relations? Now,
Ramapriya and others spoke about contract labor. According to the official estimates, in the organized factory sector, the proportion of contract labor has increased from 13% to 33%. Mind you, this is an underestimate. So, if a sound labor, if we have a sound data system, the proportion of contract labor would be somewhere around 50%. And the share of lockouts in the total workdays lost has risen tremendously. And if you see in the post-reform period, it has reached very high. And the lockouts last longer than the strikes. In other words, lockouts become virtual closures. Now, this has led to the labor flexibility and the employer militancy has led to worsening of industrial relations. Please note, I'm not saying employers are only bad. The labor militancy also is taking place. Violence is taking place on the part of employers. Violence is taking place on the part of the workers. But we have to make a pause and think, why is this? Why are we going back to the 1970s, 1960s? Why industrial relations are becoming worse? One of the reasons that you will find is that the state is abdicating its responsibility. The state is not coming out with proper labor reforms. It is coming up only with one-sided labor reforms. All I am arguing for is there should be a balanced labor reform, and then these industrial relations will not become worse. Now, in the post-reform period, then we have to ask the question: what are the labor market outcomes? Are they fair? I am just giving you some facts. The share of informal workers is 84%. And if you take informal economy, that is informal workers in the formal economy also put together, the share becomes 93%. So globalization has led to informalization. Then the proportion of casual workers who are not receiving even the minimum of minimum wages in the manufacturing sector is 31%, which is supposed to be one of the highly unionized sectors in India. Please understand, the proportion of casual workers who are vulnerably placed, who are not receiving the minimum of the minimum wages, is 31%. And the gap between the productivity and the real wage has been widening over the years. This is the contribution made by Professor Premija. Okay? And is there a just distribution of income? Gross value added is nothing but an indicator of income generated, value added. Of the value added, some would go in the form of rent, some would go in the form of profit, and some would go in the form of interest, and some would go in the form of wages. The share of wages in the value added has declined over the years very steeply. In other words, workers are not rewarded according to the productivity. So it creates equity gap. So the outcomes are not fair. And on the other hand, the supervisory and managerial staff emoluments are rising at a faster rate. The real wages of the workers are rising at a slower pace, whereas the real incomes of the salaried class is rising at a faster rate. So this creates again a kind of an income inequity. And I looked at the labor cost. Do we really require labor flexibility? Is labor cost so high? I looked at the annual set of industries data. I found only in 3 industries the proportion of labor cost is more than 10%. They are labor intensive industries. They are apparels and electronics, and both are labor intensive industries. And I classified. I took the entire data and classified the labor cost according to certain class intervals. If you see, of the 82 industry codes, only 8 industries. In 8 industries, the labor cost is more than 20%. Why should the employers be so much obsessed with the labor flexibility if the labor cost is so low? I can understand if the labor cost is 1/3, 25%, 30%, 35%. Labor flexibility I could understand. So I presume that labor flexibility is more ideological than scientific. And wage inequality between contract workers and the regular workers performing the same job. There is only one data source available, that is VB National Labour Institute study, and it shows the gap is higher in public sector and lower in private sector, and that is because of the higher wages. And of course, these are taken from the newspapers, the contract workers and regular workers wage differential. And now I come to the critical point. On the one hand, India is considered to be rigid labor law oriented country. Is it World Bank or IMD in Switzerland? All of them call India is a rigid labor regulated country. Now, for the first time in the world, ITUC, International Trade Union Council Confederation, has come out with labor law violation index and graded countries on a score of 1 to 5. And if you see in 1 to 6, and if you see India, China are places where labor rights violations are very high. Now I am asking a very simple question to the future HR managers. On the one hand, labor regulation is supposed to be tough in India. On the other hand, labor law violations are high in India. How can we reconcile these? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shah. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Okay, you heard it of us, and we have given our views for your food of thought. Now let's hear from your side. Who starts?
I'll start.
Okay. I need help.
We have to pass out the mics. We request a volunteer from fire engine. Now would you like to go first?
Sorry. Okay, let's pick some norms for asking questions. One, you need to identify yourself, and second, you need to direct your question to somebody. It shouldn't be in the air. To whom are you asking? And third, it should be brief. Right? And to panelists, what we'll do is that we have first set of questions, and then thereafter the panelists reply to you, and then we have second set of questions. Is that सब कुछ ठीक है? पहले क्वेश्चन ले लेते हैं, सब जिनको जिसे पूछना है, उसके बाद ये जवाब देंगे, और फिर आप अगर टाइम रहेगा तो दोबारा पूछ लेंगे. Start yourself.
नमस्कार सर, मेरा नाम तुषार प्रभाकर है. मैं ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेज की पढ़ाई कर रहा हूँ यहाँ पर, और मेरा सवाल हमारे ट्रेड यूनियन के लीडर्स के लिए है. सर, अभी हमने देखा कि हमारे अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर में बहुत ज्यादा वर्कर्स हैं. उनके लिए ट्रेड यूनियन क्या कर सकता है?
Good afternoon. I'm working as head HR in Tata Metallics. My question is on gender sensitivity. Ma'am, Ramapriya had raised an important issue that employers are sensitizing that the night shift be allowed for the women workers. I also represent the employer side, and I am also debating in my mind whether we should really stop women from being covered on the night shifts, because by doing that we are actually holding a set of people from not being able to first start working again and joining the workforce.
Thanks. Thank you. Next.
नमस्कार सर, मेरा नाम बेंजामिन है और मैं यहाँ पर फेलो स्टूडेंट हूँ. और मेरा प्रश्न आपसे यह है कि मैं आजकल नहीं सर पूरे पैनल से पूरे सर आप लोगों से, क्योंकि मैं एक्चुअली में एक केस स्टडी कर रहा हूँ और उस केस स्टडी में मैंने एक संस्था को लिया हुआ है. वो संस्था के अंतर्गत उसमें 3 तरह के एम्प्लॉय हैं और वो 3 तरह के एम्प्लॉय एक ही तरह के काम करते हैं. अब 3 तरह के एम्प्लॉय मैं आप लोगों को बताऊंगा कि एक है परमानेंट एम्प्लॉय जो संस्था के द्वारा परमानेंट किए गए हैं, एक है संस्था के द्वारा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पर लिए गए हैं एम्प्लॉय हैं, और तीसरी टाइप के एम्प्लॉय है जो एजेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट के जरिए एजेंसी से वो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लिए होते हैं। और तीनों के एम्प्लॉयज में सैलरी का बहुत जमीन आसमान का फर्क है। पहले वाले एम्प्लॉय को अगर 15,000 मिलता है परमानेंट वाले को, तो ड्रास्टिकली 50% का फर्क नजर आता है कॉन्ट्रैक्ट वाले एम्प्लॉय में। पहले वाले को 15 मिलता है तो दूसरे वाले को 8,000 मिलता है, और तीसरे वाले को जो एजेंसी से लिए जा रहे हैं उनको 5,000 मिलता है। मेरा सवाल पूरे सभाजनों से यही है कि इस जो भी आप अंतर देख रहे हैं इन तीनों एम्प्लॉयज में, इसका समाधान क्या है, इसको किस तरीके से इसको मिनिमाइज किया जाए? थैंक यू।
My question will be, ma'am, but it will be my question is long. It's to do with the plantation workers, tea plantation workers in Assam. My name is Visoya. I am here as an executive fellow student. I have been working associated with the tea plantation workers in Assam since the last 6-7 years, and I have been working in almost 14 tea estates in Assam. So I see a very there's a labor problem brewing, but it's very the situation in Assam and West Bengal are very contrasting. What I like, ma'am, you will be aware that the tea price population is around 75 lakh, and in Assam though they are tribals from various states, they are not considered tribals in the state of Assam, and hence they don't have all the benefits of being a tribal. And also in the tea, you are aware that the social cost is borne by the tea company, so the government does not bear the cost. So what is happening now is like they have in the current phase post Manrega and the small tea growers. Like earlier they were in the exploitative phase, the colonial period. Then you have the post tea plantation age. Then you have the STT. Now after the Manrega, what is happening is the tea corporation
ask questions.
Yeah, facing this problem of labor are going to Manrega. So now the tea industry is thinking of going towards mechanization. Many of the tea, I see the activists only making I mean to say that all the stakeholders come together rather than playing their vested interest card.
Understood. Yeah. Who are there? Yes. I'm coming.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Aman this side. So my question is Praveen, sir. Article 9.
Which Praveen?
So Article 19. So Article 19 of Indian Constitution already guarantees freedom from trade union in India. What is the rationale behind India not ratifying the ILO Convention on the same?
Okay. Constitution. Ganguly.
My question is to Professor Praveen Kumar Shah. Whatever the talk is going on regarding the reforms, there will be a generation of employment, which is true. The argument is that if we go for this labor law and governance reform, the employment will be generated. To succeed making India, the proposal is indirectly to unmake labor laws. So this is what I am understanding. Whether it is true, that's one question. The another question to Mr. Shamsundar is that whether these reforms, what they are talking about, if these reforms are brought in, as they brought in Rajasthan or in Indian government is trying to, whether it will be a challenge to the system people, whether they will be capable of attending the challenges that will be coming up. If these reforms are brought in, definitely I think the students who are there will be in a more vulnerable situation. Whether it is true or not.
Okay.
My question to Mr. Raghavan.
whatever the amendment proposed or whatever the amendment all against all through capitalism. How ILO is going to what ILO is
one in the back.
Good afternoon. I am Arjun Mahapatra from the HRM batch. My question is to the trade union leaders in the panel. MNCs, they have a no union policy, and many SEZs, the workers are not allowed to form trade unions. So what is the roadmap or what is the plan of trade unions? How do they plan to collectivize these people?
1 second. Yes, you drop down. I'm coming to you.
My question is related to the trade union leaders in the panel. I just want to ask you, so there was some mention about ITIs and how they can be used for skilling the labor market, but then NSDC reports also state that the ITIs are not really lived up to their promise. So how can this skill gap be bridged?
Okay, last quick question. I'm coming. After this. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Rajat. I'm from HRM first year. My question is to Professor Shyam Sundar. Sir, if you see the existing labor laws in the country, most of the penalties are in the lower range, except the Factories Act. So, don't you think the penalty should be indexed, inflation indexed?
Okay, you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kiran, and my question is to Madam. Madam, you mentioned that such labor forms are not needed. So, what is actually needed? And if it is too employee friendly, what is the incentive for employers to come and invest over here and generate employment? So, without employment generation, all the workers are going to starve. Basically, everybody going to poverty. So that's not an ideal situation. So that's my question.
Okay, let
generate employment or not. One of the biggest myths about employment generation is, in the academic literature as well as outside, common sense sort of, let's say, pink press and media and so on and so forth, that there is a strong connect between what happens in the so-called labor market and the overall sort of employment generation. The policies towards labor market and employment generation. As I said, it's a myth because if you look at careful studies, there is overwhelming evidence to suggest that these policies come very low down the line. Much more important is what is your larger macroeconomic policy. Right? So, for instance, I am giving you the example of the Great Depression. Right? Now, essentially, what had happened because of certain kinds of faulty macroeconomic policy, wage share on its own was coming down very drastically. Right? There was no kind of, let's say, informalization of labor in Europe or in the US, etc. at that point in time, 1920s, etc. But basically, wage share was coming down precisely because of the larger macro framework of laissez-faire. Which is when the suggestion was that the state must intervene, it must try and prop up purchasing power, effective demand, etc. Now that's a macroeconomic policy. Right? So even if you look at, most of you students here, for instance, would have looked at several studies done on behalf of MNCs. Now what is it that is creating difficulty in India? The first thing is infrastructure. Almost all studies are united on this, that one of the biggest constraints of doing business in India is not labor law or rigid labor law, but actually infrastructure, the state of infrastructure. Jagdish Khattar and I were on some panel together. He used to be MD of Maruti. Right? Now, he told me that, look, even Maruti has to depend very frequently on
what is sort of captive power and not grid power. And captive power is at least thrice as expensive as grid power. Right? I'll give you another example. So obviously the cost goes up. Right? If you look at, let's say, per unit cost of irrigation in Bihar and compare that with Punjab for a farmer. I had done this calculation about 10 years ago. I have not revisited the issue. It was 38 times higher for the Bihari farmer than for the Punjabi farmer. Now just imagine implications of it. Shyamsundar was giving you some data about the wage cost and so on. If you look at India's gross value output, our total output, and what is the wage share? 2.4%.
A lot more flexibility that is afforded by the law. For example, employers repeatedly talk about Chapter 5B. They say that more than 100 workers we need prior government permission for effecting any layout, retrenchment or closure. But in practice what happens is hardly anyone approaches the government for permission of the 5B. Even before they want to effect any retrenchment or closure, what generally happens is they introduce visa schemes whereby workers go out or they shunted out in some other manner so that the number is already reduced to below 100. So none of these things are required. For example, this is just one example. So the kind of reforms we really need are what the trade unions have been demanding, and I put it as from the board at the time. For example, equal pay for equal work when contract workers do the same or similar kind of work. That is one kind of reform, and various reforms to plug loopholes in the law so that the balance of labor and capital, actually some balance, can't be totally lopsided only in favor of capital.
But ma'am, when your demands are accepted, it will be like lopsided in favor of the
ऑर्गेनाइज करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं क्योंकि वो स्ट्रेटर है बहुत ज्यादा, इसलिए उसमें बड़ी प्रॉब्लम आती है। ऑर्गेनाइज बहुत हो रहे हैं, कंस्ट्रक्शन में हो गए, कंस्ट्रक्शन में कुछ कानून भी बनाए। दूसरा प्रयास हम ये कर रहे हैं कि सरकार पर दबाव डाल रहे हैं कि वो कम से कम अम्ब्रेला है एक एक्ट रेगुलेशन के अंतर्गत तो उनको लाया जाए जल्दी से जल्दी। तीसरा उपाय हम ये कर रहे हैं कि उनको फॉरवर्ड सेक्टर में कैसे ट्रांसफर करवाएं। वो भी कुछ हमने जो वर्तमान विद्यमान कानून है उनके तहत कार्रवाइयां शुरू की हैं। कुछ में जैसे अब आंगनबाड़ी वर्कर उनके लिए हमारा प्रयास चल रहा है कि उनको वर्कमैन डिक्लेयर करवा दिया जाए तो अपने आप वर्कमैन की श्रेणी में आए। इस तरह कई प्रयास। अभी सारी ट्रेड यूनियंस का एक ही प्रयास है कि अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर के बिना ऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर भी नहीं बच सकता, इसलिए उनको असिस्ट किया जाए।
अनऑर्गेनाइज के बारे में हम इनपुट देना चाहते हैं। उसमें एक देखिए कि अनऑर्गेनाइज, मैंने पहले भी आपको कहा कि देश में अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर के वर्कर्स का पहचान ही 1991 के बाद से लोगों ने इसमें सोचा कि ये भी वर्कर्स है। उसके पहले कोई कंसेप्ट नहीं था यहाँ इस देश में कि ये भी वर्कर्स की श्रेणी में आते हैं। लोगों को लगता था कि ट्रेन में काम करने वाले गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉइज हैं, टीचर्स हैं, यही लोग केवल वर्कर है, यही एम्प्लॉइज है, बाकी के बारे में कोई कंसेप्ट नहीं था। वो कंसेप्ट धीरे धीरे बिल्डअप हुआ, ट्रेड यूनियन का भी उसमें प्रयास हुआ और अवार्ड 91 ये चीज काफी तेजी से इसमें चल रहा है। और आपने देखा होगा कि चेंजेस भी ट्रेड यूनियन के चलते उसमें आया है। एक तो कि ऑर्गेनाइज हम लोग कर रहे हैं, अनऑर्गेनाइज को ऑर्गेनाइज करना। ILO का इसमें बहुत बड़ा एक रोल है इसको दुनिया में आगे बढ़ाने में, खास करके अपने देश में। ILO ने इसको शुरू किया। अभी ऑर्गेनाइज करने के आप टाइम में देखेंगे कि एक बड़ा सेक्टर जिसे कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर्स है, इसको हम लोगों ने एक बहुत बड़ा एक एक्ट के अंतर्गत इसको ला करके और दिया है। और आज करीब करीब देश में 20-22 हजार करोड़ रुपया केवल सेस से उनके लिए एकत्रित हुआ है। और प्रत्येक राज्य में उनके लिए एक वेलफेयर बोर्ड का गठन हुआ है और उस वेलफेयर बोर्ड में उनके रिप्रेजेंटेटिव होते हैं और उनके लिए उनके रिटायरमेंट के बाद पेंशन, उनके काम करने के दौरान उनको सपोर्ट या उनके डेथ के बाद उनको कॉम्पनसेशन, कई चीज सुविधा उनको दिया जा रहा है। देने की बात भी उसमें कही गई और शुरू भी हो गया, स्टार्ट भी हो गया, मिल भी रहा है। तो एक एक सेक्टर को अलग अलग करके ट्रेड यूनियन की तरफ से काफी प्रयास है। अब बिगर सेक्शन है आपको भी सेक्टर है एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर्स का, जिसको अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड में भी हम लोग एक अलग सेक्टर मानते हैं। एक तो अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर हो गया, एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर अलग है। और इसके लिए जो अभी एक्ट बना था जिसको मैंने कहा 2008 में जो कानून बना,
दुर्भाग्य से सरकारें जो भी आती हैं जाती हैं उस कानून के अंतर्गत अभी तक उनको सुविधा देने की बात नहीं हुई.
Supervising mechanism to raise it to the ILO, and that would mean that the government will have to answer why they are taking on this kind of reform without consultation with the workers and employers. That's one way. The other way is in terms of technical cooperation with assistance to the ILO, assistance to the government. That can be provided because ILO has a wealth of knowledge with regard to such matters. So we can, the ILO can, other units in the ILO can assist to guide them. There has been no request in that regard. But lastly, which we have, I think, passed on the message to the ministry informally so far, saying that they should talk with all the parties if they are bringing about some changes. And they are bound by that also, because as I said, they have ratified a convention which says Convention 144 on trafficism and dialogue. So they should talk with the workers.
In the country, and number 5 was trade unions. But they forgot to talk about, the media never highlighted the other 4 issues. The only issues they were constantly saying investors are not coming because of trade unions in the country. And that was not the real reason investors were not coming. The other thing is very quickly to respond to colleague from Assam on the MG Nareka thing. Yes, there are stakeholders who want to come in to look at the issues related to the workers in Nareka, but at the present moment it's very difficult to enter. First of all, it's deep rural areas, and the only connection they have is with the group leaders, the labor groups which they have, and the Gram Panchayat. The thing is, NGOs don't go in there, CSOs don't go in there, and definitely trade unions are not allowed over there. So there will be a role for multi-stakeholders to address the workers there, because the issues they are largely facing is wages, poor skills, occupation safety and health is very high. They do not even know their right roles and responsibilities as a Nareka worker. They don't even know the mechanisms to make complaints. There are no mechanisms for complaint, and also there is absolutely no awareness. So I think there is a big role one has to play in organizing the Nareka workers.
Okay, thank you, Christine. We come to conclusion of this panel discussion. Few pointers, just few pointers.
The student's question I'll answer in the class. Mr. Umesh doing the lunch, because 2 we have late.
Okay, few pointers. One, the laws are made in certain contexts, and those laws were aimed at to achieve the goals given in the Constitution. Government policies and programs are made again in context with the political environment that exists, and those were also made to achieve certain in certain circumstances. But over the years, there have been changing environment from central bank economy to market economy and what we have today. There is need to understand the change. There is need to understand what works under the change circumstances, what doesn't work under the change circumstances. Somebody said the law is moving slow, but the programs are more effective because they are the current realities. This current reality, I feel that we need to understand whether CP Singh agrees or not. Academicians do have a role because he's fighting in the field, but somebody has to do backstop work. And I think that's where the major role of academia is here, to understand concerns of the trade union, understand concerns of the employer, and to interpret what law, what institution works or will not work, and in what way it to propose. Finally, I want to thank all the panelists for their inputs,
and to all of you, to trade unionists, to students, for your interventions. And I join Mr. Nathan. In fact, all of us join Mr. Nathan in wishing you a very good academic year and bright futures to come. Thank you very much.
With this, we come to the end of the discussion. I would like to thank everyone present here, especially the speakers and the guests who took out time, and students who took out time from their busy schedule to discuss this burning issue. Thank you so much. And lunch will be served at the International Center Mess. And the panelists are requested to be back here after the lunch for interaction with the media. Thank you so much.